Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's virtual training live on March 4th at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 12 Central, 11 Mountain, and 10 Pacific. My name is Carlis Anthony. I'm the Training and Development Specialist, and with us today we also have Crystal Cedino, our Training and Development Manager. So, Crystal, do you want to say a few words?
Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here today. I know Vince, Cora, and myself greatly appreciate it. I apologize for any lag that you might be experiencing. My laptop, internet, all that's wonky and all over the place right now. But with that being said, I really do appreciate you, all of you, taking the time to be here on a Friday afternoon to sit through a workshop where we get to actually apply what we've learned all week. So today I'm actually going to have Cora take the lead on the session, and I'm here to provide support, answer any questions, anything along those lines. But yes, again, thank you. And with that, Cora, go ahead and take it away.
Awesome. So before we begin, we want to kind of show you how to interact with Microsoft Teams in case you're not familiar. So if you are on the web browser and you kind of hover your mouse over the screen, those little icons are going to pop up for you to turn on your camera or turn it off if need be. We do prefer cameras on because we get to put faces to the names and it feels a little bit more personal. And you have the ability to mute and unmute. And so there will be times throughout the presentations and the exercises that we highly encourage you to unmute, share answers out. This is really intended to be kind of like a virtual hands-on workshop for you to get the most out of it. We really do encourage that active participation. If you are like me and you are on the Microsoft Teams app, then you're going to find that same bar with options on the top right corner. So you should be able to see a big red button that says leave. And to the left of those, you're going to see the camera option. You're going to see the Microsoft microphone option and whatnot. So those are really the two that you need. And then the chat box, which is like a little chat bubble. And we will be using the chat quite a lot today. And so before we begin with today's workshop, if you haven't been with us this past week in the Board of Directors series, three-part series, let me introduce you to Vince Franco. He joined the Seminole Tribe of Florida Native Learning Center in 2011. And before joining the NLC, he was the Executive Director of the Marine Industry Education Foundation of Palm Beach County, a 501c3 charitable nonprofit organization. And prior to working in Florida, he held the position of the Executive Director of the Central Pennsylvania College Foundation and the Vice President of Education for Associated Builders and Contractors, Keystone Chapter near Hershey, Pennsylvania. So Vince, thank you after another long week of webinars for being here with us on this beautiful Friday afternoon. And so with that, I'm going to pass it off to Vince. So take it away.
All right. Thank you, Cora. Thank you, Crystal. Hello, everyone. Hello again. You can get a chance to put a name and a face together, obviously. What I'm hoping to do is to get started here. Well, there's our two people. Did you go through this, Cora? Just let me ask real quick. These things, as I'm progressing, you did, right? Okay. All right, never mind. We are here where I need to start. What I'm going to try to do for the first few minutes here is go back and recapture or redescribe a kind of an abridged version of the information that was presented way back earlier in the week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday of this week. And what I'm going to try to do is give everyone just a little review of what we talked about. But way back on Tuesday of this week, there were 3 or 4 different topics that were discussed. I went through quite a bit of it. The vision, starting with the vision and the mission of the nonprofit organization for board of directors. I talked about that. So also talked about the operation and the governing, the difference between a board that's operational in other words, hands-on, and the difference between that and a board of directors that's more driven towards governance. And I also talked about the responsibility of the board, what their, their basic fiduciary responsibilities, their legal responsibilities, and other things that they are obligated to do as a board member or as a board body. We talked about that, and also kind of spun into not only the fiduciary responsibilities, but also some of the legal obligations and responsibilities. So that was day one's conversation on Tuesday. And just to recapture some of that information and describe, I talked about the vision and the mission to refresh our collective memories. If you've never gone through this before, I think this is valuable information because every board of directors needs to understand that they need to have a mission. And if they have a vision, that's also very, very supportive and very helpful for any type of board of directors. So for those of you that are new to being on a board, or you've never been on a board before, or any particular nonprofit organization, having a mission is a very, very critical, and a vision and a mission is a very critical part of understanding, what the organization is trying to do. And everything that happens with the organization, with the board, is going to focus off the vision and the mission of that. And I talked about that extensively on Tuesday. I said, as you can see here on the screenshot, a vision statement, if you don't already have one, is something that should describe the long-term goals, kind of the big picture of the organization. The statements are kind of lofty, kind of big. This is not the place, the vision is not the place to get into details. We leave that kind of stuff for our articles of incorporation, and more specifically for the bylaws and the policies and procedures. The vision is more the big picture of what we're trying to do. It's an inspired vision statements or vision concepts should be kind of an inspiring type of thing. Where does the organization, its vision itself going over the next 3, 5, 10 years? What is it trying to accomplish in the big scheme? That's what the vision is. And it also kind of provides direction for the organization, where the mission, on the other hand, is a little more specific, but just as critically important. The mission is something that needs to be, in my humble opinion, needs to be concise, needs to be, not something that we ramble on. This is not the mission is not the place where we get into the minutia, where we get into details. It's going to be a little more specific than the vision, but not quite as specific as the articles of incorporation or bylaws, obviously. So as it says there on the screen, the mission statement should explain in simple and concise terminology as much as possible what the purpose of the organization is. The mission statement should be, in my opinion, probably no more than maybe 2 or 3 sentences. The more we can consolidate the mission, but get the point across of what we're trying to do, the better off we're going to be. Because we don't want to put ourselves in a position where we have to change our mission at any time because things are changing in our daily operation. Our mission is kind of one of those once and done type of things. We don't want to put ourselves in a situation where we're changing direction midstream. That's going to present a problem. That's why we have to be very, very careful, very methodical about picking the mission and choosing each word carefully, because we're going to have to do certain things with that mission. We're going to have to, if you want to incorporate in the state, regardless of what state you're in. I'm in Florida. You could be anywhere in the United States. You're going to have to register with the Department of State within the state that you want to do business in, and they're going to be looking for the mission of, or they might call it the purpose, but it's basically the mission of the organization. And down the road, if you're ever interested in applying for 501c3 nonprofit status, you're going to have a clearly defined mission and be able to articulate that in a way that makes sense to the IRS. The more verbiage you put in it, the more rambling you are, the more sentences in it, the more difficult it is to explain. So again, we want to try to keep that mission as concise as possible. So As you can see on the screen here, the mission should be 1 or 2 sentences. You could go a little bit more than that, but I've seen mission statements in before that are paragraphs long, 2 paragraphs, 3 paragraphs. Save that kind of detail if you can for other documents or for internal operation, not in your mission statement, not in your articles of incorporation, not even in your bylaws. That kind of detail, that's something you might want to incorporate in an annual report if you're going to do something. Mission statements, articles, bylaws should be concise. They are the owner's manual of of every organization. The mission, the articles, the bylaws are basically 3 different versions with a little more detail, but they're basically the owner's manual. So we're going to use our technical writing skills when we develop those kind of documents. This is not the time to be creative, to be verbose, to write in a persuasive manner like we would if we were doing a grant application. That's where we use persuasive language, where we're trying to convince people of the wonderful things that we're doing. The mission, the vision, the articles, the bylaws, and even our policies and procedures that we put in place should be written as if we're writing an owner's manual, where the purpose is understanding, where the purpose might be safety. That's what owner's manuals are written, to understand the purpose of what you're trying to do, whether it's an owner's manual for a lawnmower or whether it's an owner's manual for a kitchen blender. Those are written in ways, or anything, in any way, shape, or form. Those are written in a technical way to give us the steps, the procedures and the steps we need to understand the mechanics, to make something work, or to keep ourselves safe. Don't put our hands on the blender blades, that type of thing. Don't put our hand under the lawnmower because we run the risk of cutting ourselves, that type of thing. So there's a safety component, and then there's a procedural component. That's the kind of mindset we want to have when we're doing our vision, our mission, our articles, and our bylaws, and even our policies and procedures. Treat them like you would an owner's manual. Use the least amount of words possible, but convey the proper steps that are involved, the information that's needed for the user, not necessarily the reader, but for the user of this information to be able to function. And that's another difference between creative or passive writing that we do for grants and technical writing that we do for this type of thing. We want to write as if we are writing for users at the other end, where grant writing is passive writing, persuasive writing, and it's more designed for the reader, not necessarily the user. And I hope that difference makes sense. It's 2 different styles of writing, and this is something that I talk about extensively when I'm doing training for grant writing and grants management, understanding the difference between technical writing, which is geared towards productivity and safety and things like that, and persuasive writing that we reserve for when we're writing narratives for our grant application, and we're trying to convince the reader at the other end that what we're doing is worthy of their time and worthy of their investment, whether it be a grant or whatever. So I'm hovering on this a little bit because there's quite a distinction. We don't want to integrate persuasive or passive writing where technical writing needs to be, and passive persuasive writing does not belong in those documents, in those board of director documents. And I'd even take that further. They do not need to be involved in the meeting agendas. They do not, passive writing and persuasive writing does not need to be included in the minutes of the board meeting. Those are all in the mindset of technical writing and making sure, you've heard the expression, just the facts. That's what we want to convey here. So it's something that I did not mention yesterday, the day before, but I want to make sure as I'm going over this information again, that I make a very clear distinction that the vision, the mission, the articles, the bylaws, policies and procedures, agendas, minutes, all of those formal documents that we need to operate an efficient and an effective board of directors are technical documents. Keep that in mind. If you need to make notes to that effect, that's where we are. Passive persuasive language does not belong there. So that's important. I wanted to bring that to your attention when we were talking about the mission. I also talked about on the very first day, Tuesday, the difference between the operating process and the governing process. For those of you that are new to a board of directors scenario, whether you want to be a board member yourself or in some way, shape, or form you cater to board members or to the board as a body, or even if you are on the board of directors with experience, we need to make a distinction as board members between an operating or hands-on type of board situation where it's usually reserved for new board members, new boards that are just getting started, very small number of board members, 3 or 5. They're baby boards, basically brand new or, small. That's a situation where board members are forced, for lack of better words, are forced to do everything. They don't have staff. They don't necessarily have volunteers or others that they can call upon to do the daily functions. They're doing that. They're handling all of the marketing, if there is marketing, or the outreach, fundraising, and just the mechanics of running, a want-to-be organization, a want-to-be nonprofit. That's natural. That's how it works. We do everything at first. Then, as the organization grows, as the board of directors becomes more seasoned or mature, or as the board itself becomes more successful and more sophisticated in its operations, there's going to be a point where that board needs to make a transition, a segue, from a hands-on type of environment where they're doing everything or mostly everything to a point where they eventually transition into becoming more geared towards governance. That usually happens or starts to happen when the board is successful in bringing funds into the organization, substantial amount of funds. You decide what is substantial, but you get to the point where you need others to help in the daily operation. So you get to the point perhaps where you need to bring a volunteer or a part-time person or even a full-time person in a specific capacity to act as a staff person to some extent, whether that's a part-time bookkeeper or a program manager, or if you're very, very successful in bringing in funds and operational processes, maybe a director or an executive director, part-time, full-time, paid or not paid. That's the point. That is the point where the board should be saying to itself, we're starting to transition. We need to step back from day-to-day hands-on operation and move more towards procedure, policy, and governance processes, creating the environment and, delegating those daily responsibilities to staff or volunteers in whatever capacity. And there's a distinction. I'm pointing this out because when we look at boards, especially established boards that have been doing this for some time, and they're still in the capacity of interfering or getting involved in day-to-day activities when they clearly have staff people involved in it, that's where we get into some dysfunctional activities. That's where we get into what I was calling micromanagement or the potential for micromanagement. We want to make sure that there is a clear distinction between the board's responsibility and the operation of the organization. And of course, as the organization grows and more staff are brought on to handle more and more complex procedures, whatever those may be, then most likely we're going to need some kind of a staff person that is our point of contact, whatever you would call that person, a director, an executive director, a chief staff person. And that individual, he or she then becomes responsible for dealing with the staff and the staff functions on a daily basis. And there becomes a very clear distinction between day-to-day operations and governance of what the board should be doing. And with that scenario comes the situation of board members getting involved with staff or vice versa and bypassing the natural communication process that should exist, the top down, bottom up communication that should flow from board to chief staff person and from chief staff person to subordinates and vice versa. We should not have board situations or encounters, because this is a potentially dysfunctional situation where staff are bypassing their chain of command, so to speak, bypassing the executive director, let's say, and speaking or approaching or trying to do work relationship directly with an individual board member or vice versa. This is the situation that we want to mitigate, we want to avoid, we want to establish in our bylaws, in our policies and procedures, and enforce this, that processes work where staff is doing staff work, the board, then when we get to that point, and the board is doing governance work. They're creating resource opportunities, financial opportunities, compliance opportunities, whatever those opportunities are on the big picture. Creating policies and procedures perhaps, or at least approving them, and let staff do their thing. So I wanted to point that out. That's a very clear distinction between the growth of board as a body and the growth of individual board members, and being able to recognize where problems lie, and that is board members responsible for governance getting involved in the minutia of day-to-day operations when they clearly are at a point where they should be segueing into governance issues. So I talked about that quite a bit also, and it's funny, Cora, every time someone wants to come into the room, that request pops up right in the middle of the screen, and it blocks the view of whatever I have on the PowerPoint presentation. It's crazy. I can't move it. So it's weird. Okay, I also talked extensively both Tuesday and Wednesday, and even yesterday, into the responsibilities of board members. Remember, I broke that down into what I consider to be the main criteria, the main focus areas. Now, as I just mentioned just moments ago, there's a difference between that board that's doing the hands-on stuff because you're very, very new or small, and making the transition from a hands-on type of board to a governance type of board. Now, these responsibilities become even more important when the board is transitioning to that governance type of situation. Hopefully we got to a point, or the board's got to a point where it's bringing in revenue streams, it's functioning more appropriately on a day-to-day basis. Perhaps you've got a staff person, at least part-time, or maybe even full-time, and down the road you're anticipating bringing on subordinate staff to support the executive director in different capacities. But this puts more focus on the board members for their responsibility. And I talked about a couple different things. The first one was the selection, the hiring, the supporting, and the assessing of whoever that chief staff person is. That is a responsibility of the board. Then that staff person, executive director, whatever position it is, ultimately becomes responsible for the subordinates. We do not get involved with those individuals as a board member. We do not get involved with those individuals that report directly to the executive director. Our communication is streamlined between that staff person and the board. So selecting, hiring, supporting, assessing that executive director position is part of the responsibility of a board. No problem with that type of thing. So I talked about that and that relationship. I also talked about providing proper financial oversight, another major responsibility of a board of directors, especially of a matured and seasoned board of directors. One of their main responsibilities is being able to identify, secure, and bring in financial opportunities, and also human resource opportunities, any kind of opportunity for the betterment of the program. And financial oversight is a part of that. Understanding the financial operations of the program. Not that you need to be, or any particular board member needs to be a CPA or an auditor or a financial planner, but they need, collectively, they need to understand financial obligations that any nonprofit organization is going to be responsible for. And the IRS, of course, and any other type of funding source is going to hold us responsible, especially if they make an investment to our nonprofit organization in the form of a grant or a contribution or a donation or any other kind of asset that they're willing to give us or trade or barter. They're going to be looking for financial oversight and guarantees on their end that the board has the wherewithal, the ability and the capacity to provide financial oversight in every way, shape, or form. So boards are ultimately responsible for the successful financial oversight of the organization, including day-to-day activities, which are going to be reported to them, of course, right, from staff, but also, and maybe more importantly, fundraising opportunities, identifying, securing, and actually, locking into and performing or implementing, I think is the word I'm looking for, fundraising activities. And remember, I talked about fundraising being a multifaceted focus area. When it comes to fundraising, board of director members, the board itself is responsible ultimately for finance. That includes fundraising, and every board member collectively and individually needs to understand their obligation to participate in that, to understand it and to participate in the fundraising. And it should be a multi-purpose type of event where the organization is looking for different types of revenue streams, from perhaps grants on a federal level, state level, corporate level, private individual level, and we're also looking at the same time for the possibility of private contributions from private individuals. We're looking for donations from corporate entities, firms, and companies, and from other potential nonprofit organizations that are in a position to be able to make donations or grants to other nonprofits. There's nothing wrong with that. That is the whole idea of the United Way organization, just to name one. They're a nonprofit who gives donations to other nonprofits, and they're just one of 1,000 out there. But that would be the second spoke in the wheel. The first one is grants. The second one is contributions and donations from different sources. The third one is planned giving that I talked about on Wednesday. Planned giving is when we are coordinating with private individuals and with organizations out there to incorporate our particular nonprofit within as a beneficiary of whatever asset that they may possess or hope to possess, in the way of many different mechanisms here, many different vehicles. It could be cars, boats, insurance policies, annuities. It could be stocks, bonds. It could be land, any of those kind of heavy equipment. All of those things can be and should be incorporated in some kind of planned giving campaign that we're going to do or think about as a board and put something together. There is absolutely nothing wrong. The decision to be made is if you're successful in doing that, putting together as part of your major fundraising program, putting together a planned giving campaign. You'll have to decide, what you're going to do with those assets if you're successful in acquiring them. If a private individual or if another organization or a nonprofit were to donate a car, a boat, land, or something that has value, a fair market value to you, what are you going to do with that asset? You'll have to decide, and you'll have to incorporate that into your financial plan and into your fundraising plan. What if someone does give you land or does give you something that's a valuable asset? You have to decide, should we keep that as an asset, which is fine, or do we convert that asset in some way, shape, or form to cash? Do we sell it? What do we do with it? Where do we need resources most readily? And as I talked about either on Tuesday or Wednesday, I mentioned that most boards, especially most small boards, are going to try to put themselves where they're liquid, where they're creating liquidity, which means that they have easier access to funds that they can use on a regular basis or use in an emergency basis or use to some extent as leverage if they're going to perhaps pursue a loan or do some other thing where they need to show that they have assets to use as collateral. So nonprofits, boards need to figure out if we are successful, and that, that's the idea. We want to be successful in our fundraising. What are we going to do with assets other than cash? Are we going to immediately try to convert them into cash, like land or proceeds from stock? Are you going to do that? And if so, do you have the capacity to do that internally, or you're going to have to farm that out to a financial planner or to an accountant or to an attorney? That all needs to be, hopefully it's something you'll be, it's a pleasant problem, and hopefully something you'll be discussing in the big picture of your fundraising. And I would assume, and the fourth spoke in that wheel, that fundraising wheel, are the what I refer to as the traditional fundraising mechanisms, and that is, the events that you put together. It could be anything. I had mentioned Tuesday or Wednesday, I was talking about my experience back before Native Learning Center, back in the day. I was with a trade association that catered, a nonprofit with a board of directors. Remember the one with 27 members that I talked about? They had a very big event every year. They catered to the construction industry. So every year they coordinated and actually ran with volunteers what they call a heavy equipment rodeo, where members would sell their used heavy equipment, kind of like on a consignment basis, where the association would receive 80% of the proceeds and the seller of the heavy equipment would receive 20% of the proceeds. And that was part of the fundraising. And it turned out to be, for them, it turned out to be a huge fundraising event, because with that, not only came all the heavy equipment, but came with all the peripherals and all the other things that are needed for construction work, whether it's heavy highway or commercial or residential. So it turned into a big money-making thing. And with that, from an entertainment standpoint, what they did also is they had what was called a heavy equipment rodeo, where some of the best and the brightest of those heavy equipment operators would come together, and the vendors would bring in the newest version of their heavy equipment, front end loaders and that type of thing. And then these very skilled individuals would take those brand new, big, beautiful pieces of equipment and go through an obstacle course and do all kinds of crazy things. Like they would take a front end loader that had a bucket on the end of it, and they would put a chain on it with a bowling ball attached to the end. And then they would lay out 2 or 3 or 4 different bowling pins. And then they would have to take that bowling ball using the front end, the front scoop, and swing it back and forth to be able to work their way through that obstacle course of bowling pins without knocking a pin over and or intentionally knock a certain pin down. And the level of skill that these guys, these men and women had, was just phenomenal. They would do all kinds of crazy tricks with these heavy equipment pieces. Anyway, it was a big crowd pleaser. And everything was paid for by sponsors. They went out, the association, the board went out, every single board member went out and solicited contributions from what they called sponsors at different tiered levels. And then, of course, the different, based on the tiered levels that they gave sponsorship dollars to, they would promote that particular company. The association would promote that particular company in a publication they put out. So it all worked out very, very nice. But I'm referring that as the fourth spoke in the wheel of fundraising. So you've got lots of different, it's a multifaceted fundraising for every board, and every board member needs to be responsible in the successful development and the successful completion, not only of those fundraising activities, each one of them that I described, but in the financial operation of it. So what you're seeing on the screen, financial oversight is kind of a dual purpose thing. It's fundraising and the opportunities to generate revenue, non-traditional revenues. And it's also at the same time making sure that the monies that do flow in or the assets that do flow into the organization are properly maintained, properly accounted for using generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP principles for accounting, and so forth. It's not necessarily the responsibility of a potential part-time bookkeeper to keep track of all that. It's really collectively, it's everyone's responsibility to understand the importance of that, all of that. And, and it comes down to the board members being ultimately responsible for financial oversight. Another one, kind of in the same vein, is adequate resources. Now, here we're going beyond financial. We're going perhaps to human resources. We're going to compliance resources. We're going to, I'm thinking out of the box here. It's more than just financial, which I went to great extent in describing, but more, this is more of a global approach. The board is responsible for the thought process, the discussion, the decision and the implementation, monitoring, review, follow-up, all of those different components of all adequate resources that the organization needs. Whether we delegate pieces to staff, if we're able to do that, that's fine. But ultimately, we have to keep in mind that our board members collectively and individually are responsible. Also and this is in the same vein as well, organizational planning. If we are successful in our fundraising initiative, if we are successful in the financial resources that we're trying to oversee as a board, then with that third leg of the bench, so to speak, there's three legs holding up the bench, and on top of the bench sits our board of directors, but envisioning the third leg holding up that structure is organizational planning. And this is where our goal development that we talked about yesterday and the day before, the SMART goal development and the strategic planning comes into place to make sure that we have operational functions and that we have goals in place that either define what our fundraising and operational process will be or match up with what we envision. In one way or another, we need to make sure that our organizational planning is moving in the same direction and that our finances and that our operation are matching up. So, and that's a responsibility of board members. And of course, hopefully you get to a point where you're moving beyond a brand new board and you're looking at growing. So one of the responsibilities, an important one for board members, is trying to identify, recruit, solicit, whatever phrase you want to use, new blood to come into the program, because there's absolutely nothing wrong with bringing new people who are like-minded to come into the organization to bring in different perspectives. And it's perfectly normal for existing members at some point to rotate off of the board of directors at some point down the road. How long they stay involved is totally up to you. A lot of organizations have like a 2 or 3 year staggered term that allows board members to come on, stay for 2 or 3 years, perhaps move up to an officer position, remain in that position for a year or two, and then rotate off. And then the choice is up to you as a board, whether you want them to be available to come back on the board after they've rotated through. That is something for you to discuss. That is referred to as succession planning. When we're talking about board members, not only progressing through the system, if there is a system for them to progress through, but also what do they do after their experience expires as an active board member? Can they come back into the fold? Totally up to you to do. It's very common for that to happen with boards that I've seen, not only in Indian country, but also my experience on the private sector in working with nonprofits and nonprofit associations over the years. It's not on profit. And I mentioned this yesterday and the day before with the association I was affiliated with, which was much more mature, older. It was some 50 years old when I was involved in it back in the early 2000s. I left there in 2002 and it was 50 years old then. But they were well established, and everything that they did, if you recall, I mentioned they did by committee. They had members, and the members of the association were construction companies, not individuals per se, but companies. And then the companies would send their employees to participate in different functions that the association provided. So the company paid the dues, the annual dues, and then a la carte cost for different training programs and social programs. But anyway, they had a board of directors. This is the big one that had 27 people. And I mentioned the other day that they had a very successful and structured committee system that they used. And the way it worked with their committee is you would be at the beginning of the year, you could literally apply. This is like a college class. You could apply for the committee you wanted to sit on. The more, the better. So they would have individuals, members of these companies, sit on the committees. Then if you wanted to assume a leadership role within the organization in any way, shape, or form as a member of the organization, you had to first serve on a committee, right? You had to put in at least 2 years on a committee. Then you could, after the 2-year term, you could be recommended to move up to a chair position within the committee. And you could serve as a committee chair. And if you were in that committee chair position for 2 years, then you would become eligible to apply and be selected as a board member at large. So remember, they had 27 board members. So they had this hierarchy, they had this prerequisite system of committee member, committee chair, and then board member at large would be the next step up in the leadership system. Then from there, after 2 years as a member at large, then they could apply for an officer's position. And even that had a hierarchy. It started with corporate treasurer, then it went to corporate secretary, then third vice chair, second vice chair, first vice chair, sounds like an orchestra, and then chairperson. And then after serving, working your way up through, by now, what do you got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. 10 years of service within that organization to become chair. And then after you serve as the chair for 1 year or 2 years, then you can become what's referred to as an ex officio, which means you are the chairman retired, so to speak, and you still have a vote on the board as an ex officio. That's a very, very sophisticated system for a nonprofit organization, one that's well established, lots of committees, huge membership. They had over 700 companies that were members, thousands of employees that could be involved at a committee, in the committee structure. And the association had over 30 committees. So you can imagine that was a very complex system and an extreme example to show you how that could work. But basically, as you can see on the screen, even at its most fundamental level, break it down to its most fundamental level, board members are responsible for to the best of their ability, unless people are assigned to be board members, it's their responsibility to play a part in identifying, recruiting, soliciting, whatever term you want to use, of bringing more board members on. Not just that, but also making sure that those board members segue into board membership activity smoothly, effectively, and efficiently. I talked yesterday about creating an orientation program for board members, a job description for board members, and continuing education for board members. Those 3 things are fundamental processes that should be adopted for even the smallest, even the newest of boards. That needs to be thought about. How are you going to prepare for growth within the organization? How are you going to deal with succession planning? Again, a pleasant problem to think about, but yet it is a situation that needs to be discussed. Because you don't want, you're not going to plan for failure, right? You're going to plan for success. You're going to have a strong fundraising program, at least theoretically. You're going to have a succession plan for your board members, because ultimately you're responsible, even if you have board members that are assigned to you by tribal council or some other higher authority. It's our responsibility. Here's the phrase I was looking for. It behooves us to set in motion or to put in place a proper onboarding process. So whether they are elected, our board members are elected, appointed, or whatever, that we are doing the best we can and that we are developing with reasonable assurance, write that phrase down, reasonable assurance, that we are putting in place a succession planning with orientation for our board members, proper training, all the resources they need to make educated decisions to the best of their ability, with some coaching, and that we have a job description for them. We have goals perhaps for individual positions and for the board itself, and that we have continuing education that is required. And I can tell you, if you're receiving down the road any type of federal funding from any of the sources, all those processes are going to be mandatory by the Office of Management and Budget. The OMB is going to provides federal regulations that we have to abide by if we receive any type of federal funding from any federal agency, Department of Energy, Department of Education, Department of Labor, Department of Justice, etc. You would have to, whether you're a nonprofit that caters to institutions of higher learning, and I know some of you are affiliated with colleges and universities, or if you're like me, affiliated with a tribal entity working with housing. If you receive federal grants, you're going to have to abide by the regulations contained in the 2 CFR Part 200 Uniform Guidance. It applies to universities, nonprofits, tribal entities, anyone receiving federal funding, and continuing education is a requirement. So we're going to have to do it anyway. So we might as well do it from the get-go. We might as well do it up front and make it incorporated as part of our process, even to the extent that we've incorporated it into our bylaws, that we are always looking for, we have a process in place with staggered terms and a process for identifying new potential board members to come onto the board and serve in at least the capacity of a director at large, if not an officer, but at least a director. It doesn't have to be a requirement that everyone becomes an officer of the board, but it can be an opportunity that's built in that they can become an officer, chair, vice chair, secretary, or treasurer, and so on. So enough on that. Okay. How am I doing on time? Do I need to wrap up? Cora? I probably do, right?
No, you're doing fine.
Am I doing fine? Okay, I'll try to keep going. I'll move a little quick so we can get into the activities.
Vince, really quick though, I just want to make note that Cora is the one sharing the screen. So she's the one progressing slides. So I would just make sure that you're looking at Teams so that we don't miss any check for understandings or anything like that.
Okay.
Cool.
Will do. Thank you, Crystal. Okay.
You're welcome.
Next slide. Okay, I talked about this extensively the other day. The fiduciary and legal obligations we have as board members, duty of care. Remember, I talked about that, care, responsibility, due diligence to make sure we're doing everything we can do to follow, making sure that we're attending meetings, we're asking questions, we are challenging assumptions if there are any. We are not settling for status quo, those kind of situations, and we're trying to conduct business as usual. That's some of the duties of care. Another one is duty of loyalty. Basically, duty of loyalty is once we become board members, we are the board. We're part of that body. We are board members, and we are responsible as board members for the success of that organization. And that's what duty of loyalty is. We have fiduciary responsibilities. We have responsibilities to the organization to provide in whatever shape we can, way, shape, or form, the verbiage that we use, the references that we do, the circle we run in, the influences we have. We need to do all of those things for the betterment of the organization. That's what duty of loyalty is. Remaining loyal to the organization as long as we are, and it goes hand in hand with obedience. That we will follow the internal controls, the articles of incorporation, the bylaws, the policies and procedures, whatever processes that we have in place. We will follow those as board members. We are responsible for their development, for their implementation, for their monitoring, review, and we're responsible for all of that. And that's what duty of obedience is. So we reached that understanding. Just want to make sure everyone is following me on this information.
Yes, and I think we've made it to the first check for understanding. So I'm going to launch a quick question for everybody here, just to kind of touch base on where we're at. And then I'm also going to launch a second one, just to get a gauge of the room for some of the activities as to how experienced you are within board of directors. So our first check for understanding should be popping up in your screens. So if you guys can do me the beautiful favor of just choosing the best answer there so we can see those results and see kind of just where everybody's at. Let me see. Vince, can you see those results?
Yes.
Awesome. So just really quickly, we have about 80% of the participants that got the right answer. So I don't know if you want to touch base again on a vision statement should describe the long-term goals of the organization, just to clarify for that other 20%.
Yeah, and that's it. The vision really is, just as the name implies, it's the long-term look down the road to where you see the organization and or its products or services moving to. What you're trying to accomplish in the big picture. That's what the vision is.
Awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and close this off so we can save on time just a little bit. But in preparation for our afternoon activities, we do want to know, close poll. We do want to know how many years of experience do you have with board of directors. So it should be a quick box that pops up in your screen. So just choose the right range for you and let us know so that we can accommodate you guys appropriately. There we go. Vince, are you able to see those answers as well?
This is really interesting. This is really, really interesting. Look at that. Oh no, okay, now more numbers are coming in. The bulk so far, the bulk of recipients are, there's a lot of recipients in the 0 to 5. There's a big cluster of people in the 5 to 10 year. Then it drops down, and then over 15 years, we got a good amount of people. So I hope those of you that are in the plus 15, like I am, are getting some kind of a benefit out of this program. And, the training that we did over the past 3 days, plus the virtual training today, all 17% of those of you that are with us. If you're new to this, if you're within that 0 to 5 range, then you are apt, and basically the other ranges too, you're in the right place. We're going to be talking about, as you probably have gathered already, the fundamentals. So this is very, very interesting. Thank you, Cora, for putting this poll together. I appreciate it. That's very interesting results.
Awesome. And I just want to share just a quick comment because I always love positive feedback. And so Joseph says, yes, I'm enjoying this training. And Jamie shared it's helpful to reevaluate where the boards are at that he's currently working with.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm glad. I'm so glad. Good information for the new folks coming in, and maybe just a refresher you know, for some of the seasoned people as well at the other extreme, like, you know, and I learned something too. Every time I do this kind of a program, I learn something too, or have a chance to articulate something that I haven't done before. So it's a learning experience for me as well.
So you were gonna say something?
Yes, just really quick. Preston, I see that you have quite a few individuals in the room with you, which is totally okay, but we do need to gather their names. So if you could please do us the favor of plugging that into the chat box, just for our registration purposes. It's for a grant so that we can continue to do this kind of stuff. So please just take a second to throw all of those individuals that are in the room with you, their first names and last names, into the chat box. I'd greatly appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
And Vince, just for just an FYI on time, we are running a bit behind. Yeah, okay. So wanted to let you know. Wanted to be sure that we take advantage of all the activities that we have planned.
I promise I'll move through the remaining part of the refresher or review quickly.
Thank you. All right.
It is
I'm
so
sitting-
easy to get, you know, to really get into it. You know, for
Oh,
me,
absolutely. Absolutely.
so easy. Okay, let's
Okay.
keep plugging away. Part two, I just going to touch on this quickly. I really want to jump to the third bullet there, which is the SMART goals and strategic plan stuff, because I think this is critical for all board members, new, middle of the road, or seasoned and established. Everyone needs to be able to understand this process and to be able to put it in place. It's a skill set of being able to develop SMART goals that can be transitioned into strategic plans. It's a skill set that everyone needs, regardless of the position we have as board members or as grant writers or as planners in any way, shape, or form. We need to have this because it helps. It's the skill set that helps us to put substance to what we're trying to do and be able to break big nebulous topics down into manageable pieces so that we can accomplish things in stages and be able to get to the final, you know, the end game. So I'm going to move through some of these slides. I talked about this extensively. I'm just going to pull this stuff up on the screen so you can see it. I talked about all of these personal qualities of board members. I think they all make sense. We need to have all these attributes as board members, or at least strive to have all of these attributes. It makes for the best situation. And I talked about, and I've been referring to articles of incorporation and bylaws. You know how important that is now. Those are all legal documents along with the name that we file for the organization with the state. You know, those all become part of our corporate records, along with our financial statements, our audits that may or may not occur, and every decision that's made from the organization. That all becomes part of corporate records. These things should be treated like gold. They should be reserved electronically and put in a safe place. And if you have a hard copy, those also need to be put in a safe place. But at the same time, we want to make either an electronic version or a hard copy version or both accessible to board members at any time. Just to board members. We do not need to make that kind of information accessible to the world. This is a board privilege to be able to have access to this information, okay? So this is something we need to protect, and it's also, we are obligated to understand the significance of it, the big significance of these corporate documents, and also what they mean on an operation, on a day-to-day basis, what they mean, what the financial numbers imply. You know, we need to be, or want to be able to understand those things. All right, and protect them. All right, I'm not going to go into all this because I talked about this extensively. You know, we're obligated, as I mentioned before, for financial performance. We're also responsible for the mission. And of course, I'm going to get into the strategy in a minute. And I talked about extensively yesterday, day before, articles of incorporation. This is the bare bones structure. There's nothing surprising here. This is pretty straightforward information that every organization can have. So this along with our bylaws, which should be the next picture here. Those are two documents that are the owner's manual, that's I referred to before, the owner's manual of what we are as a nonprofit. This is the owner's manual that we operate as board members. So we need to understand every word and every sentence that's incorporated in here. And a word of caution, both of these are not documents that we want to put ourselves in a situation where we need to change them. We don't want to change, well, articles of incorporation don't change at all. Bylaws, we don't want to put ourselves in a situation where we're changing bylaws. Save that for your policies and procedures that are adapted as circumstances change. We don't want to the best of our ability, change bylaws. We want to keep those static. All right. And I talked a lot about that yesterday and the day before. All right. SMART goals. I just want to, this is probably one of the most important things that every organization needs to have, and that's the ability to understand the mindset and the skill set needed to develop goals that are SMART. They are systematic, they're measurable, they're attainable, they're realistic, and they're tangible. So whether we're getting information brought to us from a higher authority to do certain things, or whether we're creating them on ourselves as an independent board and trying to put certain things in function, we need to approach this situation the same way. As I mentioned yesterday, the product might change, but the concepts remain the same. And that is using the logic, what I call the logic model process, to break down major initiatives. And I'm saying all this very, very carefully because this is going to be one of your activities. Listen closely. We're going to use goal development, SMART goal development, to break down major initiatives that every organization has into doable tasks or baby steps, whatever you want to call it, to be able to fulfill step by step methodically what that process is, and then hopefully take that process, if need be, and transition it into a strategic plan or use it as part of our strategic plan. So that's what I talked about. Go to the next slide here. This is what I talked about extensively on Wednesday and yesterday, using the logic model concept. Remember the matrix there at the bottom from left to right? The bottom left is the major initiative that every organization should have, probably at least one, if not a dozen major initiatives. But that's the easy part, coming up with the big ideas. You know, we want to create a multi-use facility. We want to create infrastructure. We want to create an education program. We want to create job training for our adults. Those are all big initiatives. And that's the easy part, coming up with the initiative. Those are grandiose. The difficulty, and where the rubber meets the road, and where we all have to understand, whether we're grant writers or board members, is breaking those initiatives down into doable steps. And as you see on the screen here, and as I talked about the other day, breaking the initiatives, the big initiatives, down into a manageable series of goals, I'm calling them goals. Every major initiative has a series of goals, which are the baby steps. And every goal needs to have an outcome that is measured as a number. As you can see, they are in that third from the left column, outcome. How many people? How many will participate? How many will participate is just what Crystal was talking about, wasn't she? She said there were some people sitting in the session, multiple people sitting in one connection, right? And we needed to get email addresses. That's because we are required to do this very thing. Our funding requires us to keep track of participants, what we call attendees. So we've broken down our major initiative at the Native Learning Center, which is training, right? And one of our goals is board of director training. And one of our outcomes is to generate X amount of attendees. So that is our outcome. And with that, our result down the road is going to be, hopefully, is to increase the knowledge of board of director functions and training in the Indian Native American communities. And we're going to, we measure that success by the number of attendees. So we're following the logic model process, and you're going to do that in a few minutes, at least as an exercise. And this is just an example that I gave of particular Remember, the process remains the same, but the product changes. This happens to be one on education. So I'm going to try to wrap it. And what I did is I took that particular scenario there, the logic model using education as the product, and converted it. I used it for school, if you recall, school year 23, and then or 22, the current school year, and then push that out, all things being equal, to the next school year and the subsequent school year, and then the school year after that. That is the makings, without any adjustments, that is the making of a strategic plan for that major initiative, and that is the enhancement of academic proficiencies, starting with the current school year 22, pushing, and as of today, and pushing things out for the next 3 years, assuming that there are no changes. If there are changes, then obviously changes have to be made in subsequent years, but that is the process of the logic model. Okay, let me try to finish up because I think I've talked enough. I know it says check understanding number 2. Cora?
Yes. And Vince, if you do me a favor, close your PowerPoint and then just look at the team screen for a minute. And that way we can be in sync with the presentation. But yes, Vince is correct. We are going into our check for understanding number 2, just a quick temperature check, see if you guys are following along. So I'm going to launch that for you guys, and it should pop up on the front of your screen. And it's a quick true or false. Again, a board does not have the legal responsibility to provide oversight and accountability. This one should be easy peasy for you guys. And so if you can do us a favor and submit those answers, we have 5 responses already, but 7, I know we have plenty of people in the room, so if you can submit those. And Vince, are you able to see
Yes.
Awesome.
The result, 100% false, absolutely correct.
Awesome. So we're on the right path. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and close that one out for the sake of time, and that will thank you. If you are not able to see the poll for whatever reason, yes, you are more than welcome to put the answers in the chat. But I am going to close it off. And Vince, we are now in part 3 of the review. Are you able to see my screen where it says review of part 3?
I am. I can see it. Effective meetings, building, maintaining effectiveness, and making service fulfilling. I'm going to ask you to jump to the temperature of part 3. If you could, Cora, just jump to that, because this whole section was about just being effective, making sure that we had agendas in place, making sure that we followed parliamentary procedure, those kind of things for running our meetings, our board meetings, and committee meetings, if you have committees, that type of thing. So, Cora, if you wouldn't mind, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this. We'll just go to the end of this and take your temperature again, and as we call it. And
awesome. Yeah. So, and just for everyone's knowledge, you do have all of these these presentations to review in your email. They were sent out with today's agenda. So if for whatever reason you did not receive it, let us know in the chat, and I'll make sure to send them your way before the end of today's training. So our last temperature check or check for understanding, you get to choose multiple answers. I'm going to launch it right now. Which of the following questions do board members need to ask themselves as they take on this role? So would it be, how much money will I get paid to join as part of this board? Is there a code of conduct for board members? And are you or / they committed to being a good board member and to helping advance the mission of the organization? So you get to choose more than one answer and then submit your answers. So, are you able to see the responses, Vince?
I am, and everyone is spot on. No one picked number 1, which is how much will I get paid? That's really not, it's easy for me to say that, but it's really not the focus of why we want to be on boards, especially nonprofits, and small. It's more question number 2, question number 3. Question number 2, code of conduct, is to protect yourself and to protect other board members and to protect the board itself, from negative things. And are you committed to being a good board member and to helping advance the mission of the organization? You have to answer yes to that, because that's part of our fiduciary responsibility and one of the duties we have as board members, to be committed and responsible and obligated to the board all the time, not just on the third Tuesday of the month from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. when the board comes together for its monthly meeting. All the time, especially when we're out in the greater community talking on the benefits and features of the board. We want to, so you need to answer yes to those two questions. So thank you, Cora.
Awesome.
No.
So that brings us to our first activity of the afternoon. Intended to be a little bit more hands-on. We can guide you a little better and have a better discussion. So it says, as a potential or current member of the board of directors, describe how you would attempt to assist in providing financial and operational oversight or governance of the organization. So we kind of put an example of what your answer should look like, but we really want to give you just a couple of minutes to kind of think about this and give us in the chat some ideas as to how you would approach this type of situation. Vince, any other thoughts?
No, that's exactly right. Give it your best shot and try to fill in the blanks there based on the information that you've received or your knowledge of being a board member, and then we'll reconvene and we'll talk through some of the potential answers.
I'm going to go ahead and put the sample in the chat box for you guys to be able to kind of take it and use it. Or it's going to come out really bad. But you can copy and paste that and just kind of see some ideas as to how would you do that as a board member. And if you want to share out, please feel free to unmute yourselves. You have that capability to unmute and share out your answers. It is 2:17. So let's give you guys anywhere between 5 to 10 minutes to just brainstorm and share out. What would you attempt to do? So we have one answer already. Thank you, Jamie. It says, for the first one, as a board of directors member, I would attempt to provide financial resources, follow integral and ethical standards, assist in fundraising efforts and planned giving campaigns, and participate in strategic planning sessions. What do you think, Vince?
I think you're spot on.
Yeah.
And it's exactly right. Those are the kind of things we're looking for there, those kind of thought process. And you're obviously seeing what I'm seeing.
Shirley mentioned all of it. I'm not sure, Shirley, what you're mentioning, but if you can elaborate, maybe we can get you on the right path.
Number
So
4 says, I know Joseph is saying he can't see number 4. It says participate in blank planning sessions.
Awesome. Celeste mentions, as a BOD member, I would attempt to do the following: provide financial/grant opportunity resources. So she added the word grant there.
Yeah.
Follow and develop ethical standards, assist in fundraising efforts and planned giving campaigns, and same, participate in strategic planning sessions. So I think we're all on the right path. We have about 10 more minutes before we take our first break of the afternoon. So anybody else that wants to share out, like I mentioned, please feel free to unmute yourselves, or like our wonderful participants are already doing, type those answers away in the chat box.
I have an observation here and a question. I see Courtney put in a very interesting statement here in the chat box. She says, and we also have annual reviews / trainings on financials. Courtney, would you mind explaining a little bit in a few words, if you can, what that entails? How do you do the reviews and trainings on your financials? I'm very interested. And
Yeah, we have a committee, a board development committee that's structured as an internal group. Can you hear me okay?
Oh, yeah.
And so that group is it's about 4 people, and they would actually plan the actual event, but it would be during regular board meeting times annually for about 1 hour. And then that committee works directly with the staff person that manages our financials or is paid to manage our financials. So it kind of depends a lot on how structured your financials are as an organization. We have pretty complex aspects of our ownership structures. And so knowing the financials takes a lot of sort of awareness of how they're structured. And so we always have to review and evaluate that and help people, if they're not financially involved or trained necessarily, kind of remind them why we have that information or what that definition means. Sometimes we do this as an internal thing, but oftentimes we'll hire out to like a contractor that will come and talk about sort of financial best practices, or, we'll inform the board about like GAAP standards or other types of things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and and that's really good because financial things and auditing requirements change from year to year. And of course, we got a new federal administration in, so I know some of those requirements have changed, new tax laws, etc. Good idea. Thank you.
Okay, any other thoughts, any other answers that anybody wants to share? We have about 9 more minutes before we go on break. So Courtney went ahead and said, yes, we have an auditor, but it's really helpful that the board is able to support with thoughtful questions and ideas.
Absolutely.
Mark shares, provide financial and grant resources, follow traditional and ethical standards, assist in fundraising and community efforts, and plan campaigns and participate in strategic planning sessions. Yeah. So I don't know about you, Vince, but it seems to me like our participants are right on the target, right?
Exactly. So, exactly. And you can see from some of the comments here that some of the nonprofits are more established, more seasoned, and they're doing things that as was just described to us verbally, that are more sophisticated because obviously their organization is older and more established. Even Mark puts out the point here. He uses the phrase planned campaigns. Now that when you talk about planned events and campaign, use those phrases and those words, you're obviously a more established organization and more sophisticated when you're getting into that. And that's kind of what I was alluding to before with when I was talking about the multifaceted fundraising events. Planned campaigns, I called them planned giving, but it's the same thing I think we're talking about here. So yeah, this is very, very interesting. And I think what we're getting here, Cora, I think the folks that are commenting here are folks that are more comfortable with the process, probably more established with a more established nonprofit, more established board. But I want you all to know that I know there are folks that are participating in this program that are new to this or less experienced to this, and may not be putting in anything in the chat box because they may feel uncomfortable or not know quite what to put in there. Don't worry about that. I know you're out there. I know you need some assistance, and we're here to help you. Don't worry if you think you have to put anything in there. You don't. We understand, and we're here to help you to try to help your organization, to help your board, to help you in whatever capacity you are in, either as a board member or staff or support in some capacity. We're there to help you. So don't worry about asking the right question or putting in the right thing. I'm not grading this. Cora's a teacher, but she's not going to grade on a curve. I know she's not going to do that.
Not today.
Not today.
Courtney shares, our board recruits with that sort of cultural value too, that not everyone is coming to come with a huge financial expertise, and that we're here to keep training everyone's capacity in that responsibility.
Yeah.
And Joseph shared, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Vince.
So I was just gonna say that my point exactly. Not everyone is, an auditor or has a CPA or is an attorney or financial planner. We're not gonna get we might have some of those kind of people on our board or want to be on our board, but it's not a guarantee. But at a minimum, we need to, as pointed out here by Courtney and others, we need to make sure that our board members have a basic level of understanding and appreciation of the financial statements that are going to be generated and the consequences that our financial position at any time has on the organization. That we need to have some kind of assurances in place that our members and even our staff that are playing a supporting role understand that. So this ongoing training that we're doing here, or that you're creating or talking about, is a wonderful thing. It needs to be done, this continuing education. So I'm glad to hear that, that even in Courtney's case and others, even they've recognized the fact that not everyone that's coming on has some level of passion. They want to be there, but they may not have a level of they may not have taken finance in college or have experience with it, work experience with it, but the passion is still there, and that's a wonderful thing. Passion will trump experience most of the time. So I'd rather have someone on my board that has a passion for learning and willing to participate and to get involved and to learn, rather than someone who has a multitude of degrees. So that's just my take on it. But thank you for giving me that information. I appreciate it.
And Joseph shared that he's here learning how to fix his board's confusion.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good
So
job, Joe.
in the last couple of minutes that we have, Vince, before we go on break at 2:30, do you want to kind of explain a little bit about the logic of your possible answers that you came up with for 1, 2, 3, and 4?
Yeah, and right, what you see on the screen was just and those are just a couple words that I put in there. You saw, I think, in some of the chat box, some of the answers that were put into those 4 scenarios go beyond even what I put in the red there. Providing financial and or operational resources. There are other things. Someone mentioned grant opportunities. Yeah, absolutely. Number 2 was I put compliance because that's my background, compliance. So I put that word in there, or the laws or code of conduct. There were other comments that were observed, that were posted that fit in there very nicely. I put assistant fundraising efforts because I firmly believe everyone needs to participate in there, but there were other things that were mentioned, and that's fine. And I think everyone agreed on the last one, participate in the strategic planning session. And I would go on to say, not just the strategic planning, but the steps prior. The strategic planning is more the middle of the road. Before we get to the strategic plan, we got to have those SMART goals in place, right? And even to have the SMART goals, we got to have some kind of initiative or several of them that we're striving to reach, hopefully that are in sync with our mission, right? Sync with the mission. So the strategic planning is really the middle of the road. There are some prerequisites that come before it. And of course, there's going to be some post-requisites after that. And that is, as I mentioned the other day, the strategic plan is not a static document. It's a living document because things change. What we put in place today for this year, let alone next year or 2 years down the road, for this year is going to change. I know, no matter what we're trying to achieve, that there's going to be changes to our outcomes based on outside and inside factors that have, to various degrees, have influence over the program, positive or negative. So that translates to our goals. That ultimately translates to our strategic plan and our fundraising and everything. They need to be something more than just a static document or a pie in the sky idea. They need to be able to have goals associated with them, with outcomes and results. But we also need to understand that those things are subject to change at any time. And we need to have a path established within our board, within our organization, that allows us to make changes, not change our bylaws, but to change our processes to fit the particular needs. And if we don't have that, we're moving towards dysfunction. that's where a lot of boards run into. That's one of the things that boards run into is not being, they're inflexible. Maybe because they don't understand collectively or individually, they don't understand the functions and the repercussions that could happen, or there's hesitation or flat out resistance. But those are things that we have to recognize and deal with individually and collectively as a board member. We have to be able to be flexible and to live with it and to make changes. Those organizations that accept that and practice that are the more successful organizations. They achieve. That's a best practice. So that's something we also have to strive for as a board. Flexibility, adaptability, realistic expectations, but with flexibility and adaptability. I'm done. I'm done on that issue.
No, I always love how thorough you are and very detailed and intentional in the things that you say. But that does bring us to our break in this afternoon. It is 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So we're going to take about a 10-minute break, and then we're going to jump into our second activity, which is we're going to work you through the logic model. And so we're going to go step by step and look at what is a major initiative they want to do. How do you develop that SMART goal? And then maybe type those into the chat and have Vince give you some feedback, the outcome and the results, as he mentioned earlier. So for right now, feel free to keep your cameras off, mute yourselves and whatnot, and we will be back at 2:45. We'll be back at 2:45 Eastern Standard Time. Okay. Thank you, Vince.
Yep, my pleasure.
The presentation that was attached to the email that Cora sent out is the PowerPoint for today. So I will be sure to get that to you again in the event that something went to your junk mailbox or anything along those lines. Oh, awesome, Joseph. I'm glad. Awesome. You're welcome, Preston. Yeah, and just for reference, y'all, so for anyone that's like wondering where material is or anything along those lines, if you registered late last night or like after early this morning, you might not have made the list for all the materials and everything that we send out, but 15 minutes before the training, Cora did make it a point to send it again. So you should see an email from a Corrales Roman Anthony. And in there will be the agenda for today, along with the presentation itself. Am I right in saying that, Cora? Because I'm pretty sure those two. Yep. Okay. And then in there is also links as well for the recordings if you missed any of the sessions from earlier this week. So you have all of that. If you're still here with me, can you put something in the chat box letting me know that you're enjoying what we have so far? That chat box is how we communicate, so. Awesome. I saw a thumbs up. Awesome. Great. Okay, cool. Awesome, Kelly. I'm glad. Oh, Erica, would you be able, if you're still in the room, would you be able to put your last name into the chat box for me? I would greatly appreciate it.
Crystal, I might have missed it. I stepped out for a minute. Did you address Ann's question about financial statements?
Yes, I said that wasn't something we were particularly covering today, but if it's a document or a question that she has, I'll make sure to get with you so that we can go ahead and email her and answer anything or provide anything she may need.
Yeah, a good thing. That sounds like a plan. I don't have anything at my immediate disposal, but I can get it to answer her question, but it would take a little research on my end. So yeah, if we can collaborate after the training, I think I can get what Ann's looking for, but I don't have it today.
Preston, just in case for whatever reason you didn't get it into your email, you can download it. I just shared it in the chat box. You can download the presentation from the chat as well.
Thank you, Erica. I appreciate y'all. Like I said, and we keep saying this, and Vince alluded to it in the training, we need this information for our grant. Without it, we kind of end up, I don't want to say being in trouble, but like I mean, we can't. We report all this stuff. It goes in our APR and all of that fun stuff. So
It's our outcome. Yep.
yes, it's our outcome. There we go. That's what it was that you said.
We
It's
need
our
to keep track of
outcome.
those numbers.
Yeah. So we appreciate it. I'm hearing good. Awesome. Shauna, thank you so much. Cora, I thought a group activity would be good.
Shirley, are you any relation to Bill? Same last name.
All right, I'm going to turn my camera off because I'm just like lagging horribly and go into silencio. Hold on.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Shirley. You're out in California, and I know he is too. Let's see. Yeah. The code of conduct. I was reminded of the code of conduct again, and I do have a code of conduct. I'll have to scan it. I know I have it in my pile of stuff.
Hey, Shirley, if you look at the email that I sent out today, you have access to all of the recordings from this week. So you should also have access to that copy, but I'll make sure to send it to you today after today's training as well. Okay. So I will send that your way. Okay, we have 1 more minute before we start. So I'm going to pull up the slides again and we will jump right into the activities. Our second activity.
There it is.
Mm-hmm.
Come on.
Okay, so I'm going to be leading this first. I'm going to keep my camera off though, because I seem to experience less issues with my camera off. So, my goodness, technology. I'm going to have to go to IT on Monday.
It's great when it works.
Yeah, it's great when it works. Awful when it doesn't.
It's horrible when it fails.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I'm getting 2:45 Eastern Standard Time on my clock, so I'm going to go ahead and just jump into this. So this is a hands-on activity 2A, and we're going to actually just keep everyone in the same room. There's only about 23 of you, so it should be pretty easy. And it seems that most of you are doing very well with interacting, and I greatly appreciate that. I know Cora and Vince does as well. We love when our participants, ask us questions, interact, and engage, and all that fun stuff. So keep doing a good job on that. But with that, oh, and I see people are coming back, so I'll go ahead and admit them. Yeah, welcome back, Beverly. All right, so there's Cora. She gave a GIF into the chat. So thanks, Cora. All right, so hands-on activity 2A. All of you should have access to the worksheet that we sent out. It's actually an agenda/worksheet, and it's really just provided there for you so that you can kind of reference that sheet back at another date or time, whatever it may be, but it is there for you to utilize. So for this, we broke down the logic model as simply and comprehensively as we could with the work of Cora, Vince, and I. And I'm actually very excited for this part because I feel like a lot of the time, and Cora can definitely agree with me on this factor, is that when we're told, create a major initiative, create a SMART goal, create outcomes and results, and we tell you like, okay, go with it, it tends to get lost, and we feel that it's better if it's broken down. So for this section, we want you to create one major initiative that you're looking to carry out this fiscal year. So we're just going to start off in the first section of the logic model. Okay. So for example, Vince has an example written there. So just kind of give you guys an idea, and maybe Vince can elaborate it once I finish speaking. But there is an example, and it states enhance academic proficiency for elementary students. So if you participated in the sessions throughout the week, if I recall correctly too, and you can correct me, Vince, but this is kind of the easier part. Like this is like your desires that you want. So if y'all can go ahead and put one major initiative into the chat box, I would greatly appreciate it. And then we'll kind of just shout them out as they come through. Vince, did you have anything else you wanted to add on major initiatives?
No, you covered it. I think this is, like you said, this is the easy part, because every organization, and I think every individual on the planet, by themselves or, for their family or for wherever work, has these big grandiose ideas, right? That they want to put in place, whether you want to be the president of the United States, or you want to have $1 million in the bank, in your bank account, or you want to learn American Sign Language, or, anything. We all have those kind of grandiose ideas, right? Well, so do organizations, so do tribal entities, so do nonprofits. They have all kinds of ideas of what they want to do based on their membership, their constituents. That's the easy part, soliciting that information or thinking about it. So we're looking for here, this is where we're going to start. We want to know what those big ideas are that you have in place, because the next step is going to be a little more complicated, but we're looking for the big ideas. And I put an example there that I talked about yesterday: enhancing academic proficiency for kids in school. In this case, elementary students. That's the big idea. That's the one of the grandiose ideas for my make-believe nonprofit. They want to do this. They want to increase proficiencies of all the elementary kids in the school system. Big, huge idea. That's what we're looking for here. That's step one. Come up with those ideas. Now, you may have a bunch of them. That's just one. I wouldn't be surprised if you put out a list, if you want to share, of 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 different major things that your board or your organization wants to do. That's fine. The devil's in the details, and where it's really going to come tricky is the next step. So let's start with major initiatives. What are they? If you don't mind sharing, I'm very interested to see what you have.
We actually really do encourage you to share, because these workshops are only as good as the participation that's involved. So please go ahead and throw them into the chat now, and I will read them out loud. Awesome. Okay, so oh Lord. I'm going to just read the first one. I don't want to butcher your first name, but we've got provide technical support and training for tribal courts. And then Joseph is writing rebuilding our association major initiatives, draft new bylaws. Those on the mark, Vince?
One more time, I'm sorry.
Joseph wrote rebuilding our, I believe he means association, major initiatives and draft new bylaws.
Yeah, I'd like to know what those major initiatives are. You mentioned 2. Major initiatives is not a major initiative. What we're looking for are those draft new bylaws. That's a good one, but that sounds more like a goal. Major initiatives are the big thing. And I think maybe in that case would be, because I'm reading the chat box, I would say, using Joseph's words, try to bring more stability to board operations.
Gotcha.
That is open-ended, very big, if you think about it, because your next question in your mind's got to be, how are we going to do that? So those are the big things, I think. And looking at some of these other ones, okay, Mark says transition from operation to a governing board. Okay, again, sounds more like a goal than it is a major initiative. The major initiative, I think, is kind of like what I was talking about with Joseph, and that is to I'm using different words here, but streamline the board of director, streamline the board process, board decision process, something like that. And because it leads to the next question of how are you going to do that? How are you going to break that down into manageable pieces? Well, the first one would be transition from operation to governing board would be one of my goals. The outcome would be we want to do that in a 6-month period. The result would be 95% cooperation with board members. So that's what I'm thinking. Yeah, Joe, ditto, right, makes sense.
Okay. So
Ellen-
Shauna's stating build storm shelters for all housing tenants.
Okay, all right, yeah, that's a big one. That's a biggie. Okay.
Kelly stated small homes for homeless.
What do you mean, small home? Build small homes for homeless?
I believe that's what she means, yes.
Yeah, okay, all right, yep. So the next question is, how you gonna do that? How you gonna do it?
Right, and we'll get to that in a second.
Yep.
And then we've got Shirley who's stating enhance Pitt River language.
Okay, yeah.
Sounds like a language program.
Yeah, exactly, big, huge.
Okay, you addressed, Mark
Strengthen,
mentioned,
yep.
oh, sorry. Mark mentioned assess current BOD directives and accomplishments, transition from operation to governing board, but it sounds like you covered that already. Increase community participation in programs, workshops, events.
Okay.
Um,
Increase community participation, period. Increase, for Eleanor, increase community participation. That in itself is big. Now, how you going to do, or, the rest of her sentence there in programs, workshops, and events, those are the details. Those are the goals. Increase community participation. How? Goal number 1 in programs. Goal number 2 in workshops. Goal number 3 in events. See what I mean? I'm breaking Eleanor's sentence down into a big initiative, increase community participation, and then trying to break it down into manageable areas. But that's a good one. That's good.
No, I think that makes sense. And Eleanor, let us know if that doesn't or does. We appreciate the feedback. So Joseph wrote strengthen the stability of the association.
Okay, yep.
Darlene wrote build new houses for all elders.
Okay.
Awesome. Eleanor said yes. Preston stated initiative mixed income housing.
Create mixed income housing. Okay. That's a good initiative. Yep.
Preston also wrote elevate aesthetic value of housing projects.
Okay.
And then Darlene wrote build small affordable home village.
Build small affordable home village. Wow, yeah. Okay, that's a big one, Darlene. Okay. We're talking a whole village. We're talking a village. Okay.
It makes a village to make it happen, right?
Yeah, it takes a village. That's right. Okay, those are good. Good so far. Excellent.
Awesome. Okay.
With a little bit of tweaking, very spot on.
Awesome. Okay. All right. So then what I'm going to suggest is that since it seems like most of you understand and we've kind of modified those other initiatives that you've submitted that maybe weren't so on point, but we've made them on point. So I think we're in a good place right now.
Yeah.
So we're going to move on to 2B. So from here, and I want you all to submit your answers in the chat. How will you know you achieved this initiative? Develop SMART goals for your initiative. And I think I'm actually going to pull Eleanor's first because I felt like that was a beautiful first one. I know Vince has an example here, but as Vince mentioned, Eleanor, and Vince, you can maybe take it away. So she wanted to increase community participation And I guess the how-to would be in programs, workshops, events. Vince, I don't know if you want to add anything else there to maybe help Eleanor.
Yeah, yeah, and if we're breaking that down, that's a good example because originally Eleanor had combined what looked to me like initiatives and goals into one sentence. So I'm gonna kind of break it apart as Crystal was alluding to. I think the initiative is the first part of that sentence, and that, what was it? Increased community involvement?
Yes.
Okay, that's the initiative, because that in itself is a huge undertaking, because it leads you to the next question of what do you mean by that? You know, how are you going to do that? That's a huge task, and it's a good example of a good major initiative. So increase community involvement would be the initiative. Then where it gets a little more complicated is taking it to the next step, and that is creating manageable and attainable goals. And it sounds like she has at least 3 different areas of potential goals that can focus on. And what were the three? I don't have the chat in front of me.
It's okay. I can tell you.
So, yeah,
She said increase community participation in programs, workshops, and events.
okay. Goal number 1 would be programs. Goal number 3 would be events, and whatever that second one is would be number
Workshops.
2. Okay.
Workshops.
I envision those 3 as the SMART goals because you can assign some kind of measurable progress within each of those areas. So let's take a look at the last one, events. I don't know what she means by events, but so there needs to be a little bit more. The word events in itself is open-ended and broad, so that probably needs to be defined a little bit. What does an event mean? But from there, you should be able to assign some kind of a SMART goal for it. In other words, let's say the event is my example of a heavy equipment rodeo, right? That's an event. It was an event that was held by my previous employer back in the day. And so my event / heavy equipment rodeo, my SMART goal would be to implement that particular event within the calendar year, within fiscal year 2023. That would be one of my goals. And what was the first one, Crystal?
Programs, I believe.
Programs.
Yes, programs.
Okay, that's also an open-ended. What do you mean by programs? When I hear programs, I work at the Native Learning Center, so when I hear programs, I think of something totally different. But we need a little more definition. What do you mean by a program? If it was Native Learning,
She wrote, Eleanor said, example, we have a series of events planned for Earth Week coming up at the end of April.
Beautiful. Okay. Celebrating Earth Week. Okay, great. So that is something that could be listed as one of your 3 or 4 goals that supplement your major initiative of increasing participation. But it needs a little more definition. It needs a little more clarification of how you're going to measure progress with that. Is that Earth event, is that something that could be measured in some capacity? Because if it can, then you can generate an outcome. And maybe the outcome is the number of participants or the number of sponsors that you're going to have for it. I'm just being hypothetical here. You need to, for every goal that you assign with an initiative, it has to be formatted in a way that that can be measurable and attainable. If it can't, then it's really should be taken out of the formula. It's got to be measurable. But the way you started, Eleanor, with my major initiative is to increase participation of the community, and your goals could be, I hear 3 or 4 now. Goals, as long as they're measurable in some way or shape.
Yeah, she wrote number of participants.
Okay. That's all you need to say. Number of participants in the next fiscal year or this year. All right. The outcome is going to be where you're going to put your numbers. How many people what's the goal? How many people are the goal? 10, 100, 1,000? You know, what is the expected, or, you know, and this is where you got to be kind of realistic with it. How many people realistically can you expect to participate in this program? Or if it's sponsors or vendors, how many of those do you anticipate? Those are your outcomes. Okay.
Beautiful. All right, so I think that's a pretty good example. So for those of you who went ahead and entered your initiatives into the chat box, go ahead and take a few minutes to create some SMART goals for them. So kind of like just what we worked through with Eleanor on hers. So Joseph wrote, define a new mission statement, draft new bylaws, draft job descriptions for board officers, set training for the board to allow the association to expand our outcomes.
Okay.
What do we think?
Those are the goals. Okay, right. Okay. Now, as long as you can associate some kind of numerical outcome to those potential goals, then you're moving in the right direction. But I like what I hear. That's good.
Good.
And
Anyone else? Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Vince.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, if anyone else, go ahead and throw your SMART goals into the chat. All right, so Darlene mentioned small homes, elder homes. Create a, it says add HOC community committee. I'm not sure if I'm reading that correctly. And then B, develop needs analysis, and C, create feasibility plan. Ad hoc. I don't know. Vince, if you can.
Which one is that? There's so many of them on.
I know. Just scroll all the way to the bottom, Darlene.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Let me go. Things keep popping up at the bottom of my screen here. So Darlene says ad hoc committees is a, yes, okay. An ad hoc committee is a special committee that we put together to serve the purpose. It's not a standing committee. That's what ad hoc means. Okay. Like hiring your first executive director. Okay, Janine, I'm looking at that one at this particular moment. Jamie said like hiring our first executive director, but I'm not sure what the initiative is. But if that's a goal, that's fine. That's a good one actually for a growing organization, but your outcome would be some kind of time frame. You know, instead of attendees, you would have some kind of a time frame listed there, like within 12 months or within 6 months or within 24 months. That would be your outcome for perhaps for trying to identify an executive director. And of course, the result would be pulling that off within a shorter period of time, maybe.
It looks like Jamie was in response to Joseph.
In response to Joseph. Okay. Small homes, elder homes that Darlene posted. Yeah, I think we're talking, the major initiative would probably be enhance or increase housing availability, and then the goals, and this would be multiple. One would be increase small homes. And then maybe another would be increase elder homes, unless they're the same thing. If it's small homes for elders, I'm not quite sure. Create ad hoc community committee. Okay, that could be one of your goals, and the outcomes would be the time frame that, you know, or the number of members that you want on that ad hoc committee. Now, we're moving in the right direction here. A lot of this input is spot on.
Okay.
And Joseph said the mission statement, bylaws, draft job descriptions, those are all SMART goals. And the outcomes would be based on, you know, how quickly you want to turn that stuff around.
Beautiful. Kelly wrote, look for grants, apply for grants, planning of building, build home, place a tenant.
Where are you? Oh, I see, Kelly. Look for grants, apply for grants, planning of building, build home, place a tenant. Okay, sounds like a progression there. Where the initiative was probably enhance housing opportunities or building opportunities, and then the goals, you have a series of them. Identify grants would perhaps be one. The next goal would be apply, well, no, that wouldn't be a standalone. If you're looking for grants, the assumption is you're going to apply for grants. It's going to be more like secure grant funding, because how are you going to measure that? You know, the outcome, if you list a goal as secure related grant funding, then the outcome has to be something you can measure. You know, when are you going to do it? Within the next 6 months, within the next 12 months? And is it based on time, or is it based on dollar value, or is it based on number of grants? You know, that kind of thing. And then planning of the building could be a goal, but that might be planability. That might be broken down into phases, because you might have to get architectural involvement, you might have to have land improvement, you might have to have environmental issues. So Kelly, those are good, but and I can see the levels built into them. Building the home itself or series of homes, there's going to be infrastructure issues there that might have to be timed out as part of your SMART goal. And placing the tenants, that is something in and of itself. You know, placing of tenants would be, you know, are you going to have an application process? When is that going to go into effect? Who's eligible to apply for it? And there's going to be all kinds of admissions and occupancy issues related to placing a tenant. Is it a rental? Is it owner occupied? You know, those kind of things would add layers. And by the way, what you're seeing on the screen is a very simplistic version of a logic model, as you can probably gather by the description and the comments in the chat box for your individual scenarios. You can imagine that this logic model could be much more complex than what we're showing here. I'm showing a very simplistic with one major initiative and one SMART goal with generating an outcome and a result. There could be several goals associated with one particular initiative, like we're commenting on in the chat box. So there might be steps, subparts to the SMART goals, depending upon the complexity of what your initiative is. When anytime it comes to examples of like building a facility or building the village of homes for a community, you can just imagine all the steps that are involved in doing that, from the planning process, where you've got community involvement, you probably got architects and engineers, and then once that's settled, you move into the pre-construction phase, where you're soliciting a general contractor and subcontractors to do the land work, and you might even have environmental issues to deal with. And then you've got the actual construction phase, where they're moving land, they're actually doing development and building the facility. And then you've got the implementation stage, where you actually have a finished product and you're populating that product. So, you know, there might be several sub goals affiliated with any particular goal that matches up with an initiative. And I'm trying not to confuse everyone here by saying all this, but I hope you understand what I'm saying here. What you're seeing is a very simplistic, straightforward scenario, but what you're presenting in the chat box, oftentimes, as I'm looking at most of them, are very sophisticated, and there's a lot of needs and probably a lot of steps involved. And this is where it gets challenging to break things down into these sub goals that are needed in some cases. Shauna is talking about determining which houses need storm shelters. Okay, determine what kind of storm shelter are needed. So you can see right there, the second half of that sentence is taking it to the next level. First of all, the major initiative probably is making some kind of evaluation or determining homes that need storm shelters. Boom, that's it. That's the major initiative. The first goal would be not only identifying them, but then determining what kind of storm shelter are needed. You know, if you were down here in South Florida, there's certain particular needs when it comes to protecting homes. Now, we deal with hurricanes and floods and things like that. So you can imagine the type of protections that we need. It's going to be flood and rain oriented, ground saturation and those kind of things. Where if you're in the Midwest, or if you're in the Southwest, you've got other issues such as earthquakes. You've got heat issues in the arid Southwest area. So different things that are needed.
Beautiful. So, I mean, for the purposes of, you know, this exercise and what we're doing, so it sounds like, you know, the group has some really great and big ideas and goals that they'd like to accomplish, but obviously there's going to be a little bit more meat involved in them, which is totally okay. But I want to, like, you know, reel it back in and, you know, maybe focus on one out of the particular, you know, sum of all the goals that they have in mind. So overall, it seems like, and I think most of you kind of understand this, and, you know, y'all can correct me, let me know if you're confused, if you're lost, or anything like that. But it seems like that most of your goals, obviously they're going to have to be a bit more detailed. There's going to be a bit more wording to them, but the main thing that needs to come out of your goals is that you have to be able to measure them, and they have to be, you know, realistic and attainable, or attainable and realistic if we're following the acronym. And yeah, so I mean, for the most part, it seems that most of y'all are good. Let me know. Let me get a temperature check on y'all. Let me know if you're good, if you're lost. Go ahead and throw that in the chat box. Specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. Yes. So I got a thumbs up from someone. Kelly said thank you. There's about 20 something of you in the room. So come on, folks, let's wakey. Let me know how it's going. 1 for good in the chat, 2 for lost in the chat. 1. Eleanor, thank you. 1, thank you. Good, I'm good. Enjoying this, and chats are working too. Awesome. Awesome. And Preston, I hope the folks that are in the room with you, they're good too. I hope you're speaking for all of you.
I see a lot of ones there. Good.
Yeah, good. Okay. Yes. Awesome. All right. So, I mean, it seems for the most part, you know, like I said, or like Vince mentioned, we're on track. So I'm going to go ahead and shift to outcomes. So I'm just going to go ahead and read Vince's example that's here on the board. I'm going to start from major initiatives. So the example that's listed here is enhance academic proficiencies for elementary students. And then the SMART goal that he has associated with that is increased performance for grade levels 3 through 5 in math. So fantastic. And the outcome, like how many he has listed here, are going to be for 30 students. Okay. So based on your major initiatives and the SMART goals that we discussed so far, I'd like for all of you to think of outcomes for those goals. So if you can go ahead and do that in the chat, I'd greatly appreciate it. So like for this one, it's saying increase performance for grade levels 3 through 5 in math by 30 students. Am I reading that correctly, Vince?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, by
That's
30
correct.
Students. So
because in this example, it was
Yep.
based on the number of students. That's the focus. But in some of the scenarios that were being in the chat box, it wasn't necessarily attendance or students, it was other things. Again, we had elders, we had tasks in some cases that were translated into the SMART goals, and that's fine as long as you can assign some kind of outcome to it and measure its progress. So if I were to come to you and, you know, down the road, if you say, I want to implement articles of incorporation, or I want to hire an executive director, my first question to you is going to be, how are you going to measure your progress in doing that? You got to do it, you know. my understanding is it's something you got to do and it's a worthy goal. But if you can't measure your progress at any given time, imagine, just a program reviewer or an auditor or someone like myself coming into your organization saying to you, what are your major initiatives and how are you going to get there? And you say, well, we want to hire, one of our major initiatives is to increase community involvement. And I go, that's great. Wonderful. That's a great initiative. How are you going to get there? How are you going to measure your success 6 months from now, a year from now, 72 weeks from now? Where are you going to be? If you cannot convert that into some kind of outcome, as you see here, and you can't translate it into a numerical equation, then it just becomes, well, this is our hope and dream. We want to hire somebody, or we want to increase community involvement, but we have no way to track our performance. This is what this is all about, trying, and this is where it gets difficult, to be honest with you folks. This is where it gets difficult because you have to transition, you have to think about these things through. How are you going to transition all those wonderful things that you shared in the chat box about your goals into some kind of measurable performance? And I'm not picking on anyone. I'm not trying to do anything. So when you say you want to pursue grant funding, what do you mean exactly by that? And that's just one example. How do you measure that? Is it going to be in dollars? Is it going to be in a time frame, or both? Like, we want to achieve grant funding for our initiative to build a multi-use facility. Okay, that is our goal. We're going to pursue grants. The outcome would be we want to attain $100,000, and we want to do it within a 12-month period. Now that's an outcome, right? That's measurable. That is an outcome for something that's a little bit open-ended. We want to pursue grants. Well, we all want to pursue grants. That's a given in our industry, right? Pursuing grants, pursuing fundraising. We've been talking about that for 3 days. That's a given. We're doing that. Be more specific. Break things down. Use your left brain here. Be more methodical and think about how you're going to get there in a way that you can measure and share the results and explain it numerically. This is your technical writing skill coming into play here, because you're then also going to have to describe this verbally in a narrative form, especially if you're filling out that grant application. You're going to have to describe it in a numerical format. So here, this is the way we need to think about these things. Okay.
Beautiful. So I just wrote one just for us for fun, because I'm not seeing anyone submit anything yet. But I wrote, yeah, they're thinking. But I wrote increase the amount of trainings for tribal members in a fiscal year. Is that a good one, Vince? How do you feel about that one?
Yeah, that would fit very nicely as a major initiative. Okay. Increase the amount of trainings for tribal members in a fiscal year. Now, take it to the next step. What is your goal for that? I could think through a couple scenarios, because I'm an insider, of course. I could think of a couple scenarios where we can create measurable, specific goals that match up with that initiative. Then the trick is going to be, as you two know, Cora and Crystal, this is what your strategic planning is all about, right? You're going to try to associate a number, an outcome, with that training in different categories, right? So if your major initiative is increase the amount of trainings, your SMART goals could be in grant writing, in grant management, in your general categories. Okay. And I know you have 4 or 5 different major categories. And then your outcomes would be the number of attendees in each of those different categories. So you probably end up with 6 or 7 goals underneath your category.
Yeah. Or challenged me. Yeah. She wrote, increase the amount of trainings for tribal members by 20% in grant writing by Q2.
Yeah, see, very specific.
Very.
All right. Shauna says 60 homes and 2 apartment complexes were identified as needing storm shelter. Boom, there you go. That's good. You're getting specific now. 60 homes. That sounds like a lot. and 2 apartment complexes were identified as needing storm shelters. Okay. And we still need to define what a storm shelter is, at least for I mean, not for you, but I need to know what it is. So that's a really good example. Okay. Increase the amount of train traffic. Yep, by 20%, absolutely.
And then Darlene wrote, first check actual success rates of Native American students in science and math, and check total population of students.
Okay. First check actual success rates of Native American students in science and math. Yep, you need to have a reference. So that's part of your research. And you're going to make a comparison, I would assume, in your outcomes, or base your outcomes on some of those statistics. You're doing the research, you're going out to look at actual numbers of Native American students in science and math. Good, you can get that statistical information, and then use your projection, your outcomes as use those statistics as a barometer to help you determine realistic outcomes. That's a great approach in that scenario. You want to be able to go back and use other reliable sources to use as a benchmark, perhaps, to calculate what's realistic for your own organization. And what Darlene is talking about there is a perfect example to use as a reference, and then gauge your outcome on those statistics, those national and specialized statistics. I like that. Set goals related to the population. Yes, yes, yes. Darlene, spot on. Exactly. Good scenario there with specific numbers and reliable sources that you can make comparisons to. So you can make an educated, and I'll be honest with you, it's an educated guess as to what your outcomes are going to be in as you project out in the subsequent fiscal years. So it is an educated guess, and you want to make that educated guess as accurate as possible. And sometimes using these kind of references, regionally, statewide, nationally, specific things, are a great asset for us to use.
Beautiful.
I agree with you totally.
I skipped over Mark on accident. He said initiative increase BOD size, outcome 15 members.
Where are you?
Mark,
Oh,
Mark.
I see. I got something covering that. Hold on. I've got an awesome cover. I can't read it because there's something covering it up. Can you read
Yeah.
it?
Yeah, it says initiative, and I'm assuming this is what he means. The initiative is to increase BOD size,
Okay.
and his outcome would be by 15 members.
Okay. Yeah, that would be his outcome by 15. Okay. Major initiative to increase board size.
Yes, that's what's
Smart.
written.
The goal would be maybe the same thing, increase board size. It's basically, no, wait a minute. Why are you increasing board size? Here's the major initiative question. Why are you increasing board size? To be more effective?
Not more effective. We need more community involvement.
Okay.
And we have so many communities that we're looking at. We have approximately 20 communities.
Wow.
And if we get at least 15, get it up to 15 members, then we may get that result.
Okay. And the result would be to have more community involvement.
Yes.
Correct.
Yeah, correct. Because I think as per my previous training, we're trying to get International Olympic Committee recognition.
Yeah, I remember that. Okay. The major initiative, I think, is the increase of community involvement. And one of the goals would be to reflect that through an increase of board members. That's goal number 1. And you might have some others. And then your outcome would be increase by 2 or 3 or 5 members.
Okay.
And that would be your outcome, increase by, well, pick a number, increase by 3 members or 3 members. And then the result would be a 40% increase in board members. Also, your SMART goal, increase board membership. You got to give a time frame. Increase board membership, increase board size by 3 members within what kind of time frame? Within 6 months, a year? You know, pick a time frame. Pick a time frame.
Okay.
Increase board membership by 3 members within the fiscal year. There's your goal. Your outcome would be 3 members are vetted and placed on the board, and your outcome is an increase in board membership by 33%.
Okay.
Something on that end. Good stuff. Good stuff. All right, Crystal, I think we're humming along.
Oh, I was muted.
Bueller.
Bueller. Okay. So with that, and we went over Darlene, set goals related to population. Yes. Okay, awesome. All right, so now we're going to move on to results. And Vince is way more versed in this than I am, but but in essence, it's just what percentage, what was your increase, of that SMART goal, or in outcome, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Vince, you wanna?
Yeah, so if in this scenario, if it's 30 students, that was the outcome, I know from doing the math that would be a 60% increase in the amount of students that were exposed to the proficiencies in grades 3 through 5. Now, in the scenario, Mark's scenario that he just presented to me so articulately, he was talking about increasing board members. So his result would be different than 60% increase in students. It's going to be more like a 30% increase in board members, right? He's got a different product that he's talking about here. Same concept, different product. The result is the percentage over time. How is it going to affect the organization? What effect is it going to have? That's what the result is. That's what you're trying to measure. In the scenario you see in the screenshot, I'm measuring students that are exposed. So that's what I'm looking for. My outcome is a number of students, and my result is a percentage of students that are exposed. Mark's scenario, he's talking about board members and an increase that ultimately leads back to community involvement. So his measuring benchmark is different than mine. And all the other things I looked at, Shauna's 60 homes and 2 apartment complexes, that's a different product as well. Now we're talking storm shelters for homes and apartment complexes. So her outcome, well, she's got an outcome there. 60 homes would be improved and 2 apartment complexes. Now, taking it to the next step, what a result would that have? I'm guessing here because I don't know the big picture. Do the 60 homes represent a certain percentage of total homes for the tribe? In other words, are there 100 homes altogether, or 200, or 1,000? So the 60% that are getting the storm improvements reflects what percentage. Is 60%, is it 60% of 100? Is the 60 homes a small, the percentage is what I'm looking for here. I don't know how many total homes are in the tribal community there and what 60 represents. So Shauna, your resulting percentages are going to reflect something different. So it's a different product, and I don't know how many apartment you say two out of how many? 2 out of 20. So that's what I'm looking for there, and I don't know the scenario, and that's okay. You don't have to do anything. I'm not asking you to put you on the spot to come up with answers, but that's what we're looking for there. Different product. Same thing, if we're doing Joseph's bylaws, and he has the new mission, new bylaws, get 3 out of 3 members in agreement with this current fiscal year ending September 2022. Those are all worthy goals in themselves, but we're going to have to find some way to measure those outcomes. And then, as you saw, and then also put some kind of percentage result to them. So again, this is where it gets a little bit challenging and a little bit difficult, but it can be done. And I'm just scrolling through some of the other scenarios.
Yeah.
We had Grant. Yeah.
No, I was just gonna say, so it sounds like there needs to be some research involved in figuring out in certain scenarios what you currently have right now, where you're standing in this current moment, and then that way you can go ahead and figure out, that calculation for your result. Otherwise, without that information, you're not going to really be able to figure out what that increase is going to look like or what that increase could potentially look like.
Well, absolutely. You've got to mitigate the possibility of you making guesswork. You want to make your outcomes and your results, since those are supposed to be real numbers, you want to do your research and you want to, make sure that your calculations are as accurate as they possibly can be. So wherever you can do research to back up your calculations, that is encouraged. Because you want to try to minimize the amount of changes that you're making to your outcomes and your results and ultimately to your strategic plan. You want to minimize changes to it as much as possible. So what do they call that in the construction industry? Change orders. You want to minimize the amount of change orders you have by doing your research as much as possible and bringing in subject matter experts where you can, and reliable sources where you can identify them as much as possible so you can make the best, let's be honest here, the best educated guess that you can in your projections. So wherever you can gather resources or collaborate with others, that's what you want to do, because it'll help you in the long run to minimize the amount of change orders, the amount of changes you're making, not only to your current SMART goals for the current year, but also your projections 1 year, 2 years, 3 years out. That's going to be critical. If you're talking about such things as I saw here in the chat box, building a facility, for example, that's a multi-stage event that might take years to go through the planning, the actual construction, and the actual housing and use of that. That might be 2 or 3 years in reality to make that go from A to Z, from concept to use. So the more research, and that's just one example. I'm not minimizing any of the other examples that came either, but the more research you can do to support your position, the better off you're going to be in the long run. So, and what we're shooting here for with our outcomes and our results is accuracy, as much accuracy as possible. That's why this process is critical, to be able to take a nebulous concept and turn it into something that's measurable and attainable. Not an easy task in some cases, taking something that is kind of open-ended, and it's probably open-ended because no one's been able to take it to this step. Because this is where it gets difficult. This is where the rubber meets the road. This is turning ideas into tasks and, making things work. But as you see on the screen, this simplistic version of identifying a major initiative and then taking it to the next step to identify goals that are attainable and measurable, that generate an outcome, that generate a result. This is call these whatever you want to call them. And when you're educating others within your social group, within your work group, you can use these terms or you can call them whatever you want. I know some people like to say, Vince, you're calling it a major initiative. In our tribe, in our group, we call that a goal. Fine, call that a goal. And then call what I call SMART goals, anything you want to call them. It's the concept that's important here, and being able to use the skill set to walk through this, and if we need to, force our colleagues, force others to understand that if we just come in with the idea of building infrastructure or building a building, or seeking grants, that's wonderful. We should all do those kind of things. But if we can't convert them into measurable processes, they're not going to go anywhere. And they'll still be talked about and kicked around, as my kids call it, kicking rocks down the street. That's all it's going to be is a rock kicking exercise. So I really can't stress this anymore, how important this process is, and however you want to manipulate what you see on the screen here, this simplistic look at it, however you want to enhance it or minimize it or increase it is your call. You want to use this and fit this or manipulate this to fit all of your particular major initiatives. So it works for you.
Beautiful. So
Joe
just,
said, with 100% agreement of mission and bylaws, we define our community social value. Yep. And we recruit 3 or more members each fiscal to activate the defined community social activities of the association. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. And that would be the focus. Hopefully that's happened or should happen.
beautiful.
Yeah, very
All
good.
right. Is there anyone else that is able to maybe provide a result for, or a potential result for any of the SMART goals you've developed from your major initiatives? Speak now or forever hold your peace. We're only going to stick on this for just a few more minutes, and then we're going to go on to the next exercise, which Cora will be facilitating. So, Bueller, anyone else? Bueller. Or are we good? If you can give me a good in the chat box, I'm happy with that as well, and I will zip it up. Yes. Good. Anyone else? We're good. Good. I'd love a majority of good. Good, 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 good. I'm seeing good. All right. Well, with that, I am going to zip it up as I have promised and pass it on to Cora.
Mr. Bean.
Yes, I love it, Mark. Thank you.
Okay, guys, so we're almost at the end of this workshop today. So we're gonna start our hands-on activity number 3. And so this one's gonna work a little differently. I'm gonna put a quick link in the chat. If you guys can click on that, all of your answers are gonna get displayed outright. And so what we want you to tell us is, as a potential or current member of a board of directors, describe how you would attempt to avoid dysfunction. So we're going to focus on that. How are we going to avoid the dysfunction? And by doing so, assist in the effectiveness and efficiency of your meetings. So if you click on that link, it will allow us to start seeing all of your answers here on the screen. So, Crystal, are we able to see the screen?
Yes, ma'am.
Awesome. So how would you guys attempt to avoid dysfunction in your meetings? So go ahead and click on that link that I posted in the chat, and we should start seeing your answers pretty soon. And so that way, it's just a different way to keep things different and interactive, and display all of your amazing answers.
I love Menti. I think it's so fun.
Me too. So yes, if you guys can go ahead and do that, we should start seeing your answers pop up. And there's our first one. Awesome. So participant says, follow strict parliamentary procedures, set of rules of the order. Good. Vince, any thoughts?
Strict parliamentary. We talked about that yesterday, following some kind of parliamentary procedure so that you have control and some reliability and expectations of properly and efficiently run meetings. So either strict parliamentary or some kind of variation of parliamentary procedure, one that the board can adopt and agree to and live with. Absolutely.
Awesome. Are you able to see the other chat bubbles that are popping up?
Yes, as soon as I remove someone trying to get into the, when someone tries to come into the meeting, the request comes right up in the middle of my screen. Okay, how would you attempt to avoid dysfunction in your meetings? Define expectations, follow an agenda, absolutely. Define expectations. Yeah, let's just talk about that just for a second, because that probably needs to be expanded on. You know, I kind of alluded to the fact that we need to create job descriptions. You heard me talk about that for board members. We need to have an orientation of some kind for board members and continuing education as well. I think that's part of the expectations that we have for board members, and it needs to be in a written format, and it needs to be incorporated into the bylaws and agreed upon by board members that expectations are required, and here they are. Code of conduct, orientations, parliamentary procedures, etc. Those are part of the expectations. Also send out an agenda at least 5 days in advance. Good idea. Okay. Always a good idea to send those agendas out in advance. Training in Robert's Rules of Order, reviewing policies. Yeah. For those of you who don't know, Robert's Rules of Order is parliamentary procedure. When I'm talking parliamentary procedure, I'm actually talking about Robert's Rules of Order, which is a process of parliamentary procedure. My recommendation is to get familiar with Robert Rules of Order specifically. And, I literally have it right here. I don't know if you can see it. I just picked up the book, Robert's Rules of Order. I look at it all the time. You don't necessarily have to follow it word for word. It can get a little complicated. It's not exactly friendly to smaller nonprofits and smaller groups, but following some kind of modified Robert's Rules of Order, aka modified parliamentary procedure, is fine, as long as everyone's in agreement. Have and follow meeting rules, absolutely. Yes, and then the last one, second to the last one I have so far. Understand the mission of the organization. Those are beautiful words, yes. Follow an agenda, correct. Follow the duties of each, that's it. Understand and know the duties of each board member. Absolutely correct. What are the responsibilities of the chair, vice chair, secretary, treasurer, if you have those positions, or a member at large, if you have that, etc. And understand the role of staff and the role that the executive director, if you have one, plays in communication with subordinate staff, and the role that that person has, executive director in this scenario, to the board, and the communication that flows back and the responsibilities between the two entities. All right, so that's good too. And the last one I have here, Cora, is follow policy. Policies do not do you any good at all. You can have the best policies in the world, but if you don't enforce them, then they serve no purpose. So yeah, and that's coming from the compliance guy. I can write the most beautiful compliance that's in sync with what we're doing at the Native Learning Center and signed off by the executive director and so forth. But if we don't follow them, if I don't educate the staff, for example, if I don't share this information and get the buy-in from staff, then that policy serves no purpose. In fact, it can work against me. It can work against the organization. So it behooves me, and it would behoove you, to take your policies and make sure everyone understands them with reasonable assurance that everyone is on the same page, that they understand it, and there's some agreement that everyone will abide by. That's where your code of conduct comes into play as well. That should be incorporated in the code of conduct, that policies will be written, disseminated, and explained, enforced, etc., to the best of the ability of the organization, with the reasonable assurance that everyone will abide by them. And then you can go from there. Orienting new and old board members, sharing board info. There's three things in that one statement that are absolutely correct. And I've been kind of preaching on that for the past 3 days. Number one, orienting new board members. Absolutely. Orienting them so they know. And there's nothing wrong with existing board members to sit in on that so they hear that information being presented to new or real board members. Old board members need everyone. Once they are brought on board, there should also be mechanisms in place for continuing education, like you're doing here for this course. This should be standard operating procedure, not necessarily this class, but continuing education in general, that's related to the functions of the board that matches up with your mission. So, for example, understanding financial statements. Perfect example of something that that every board member needs to have, because you're not all CPAs. So a basic course every year on understanding, take it a little further, understanding financial statements for a nonprofit organization, for a small nonprofit organization. So, you know, you need to identify someone out there in the community, and there are lots of people out there that can provide that service for you. And then the last thing is share BOD information. Now, that's a multifaceted concept in itself. We need to share information amongst our colleagues, our own board members, to make sure they're aware that everyone's up to speed at any given time. And we also need to share that information with the executive director. And if you need to, there's going to be some cases where that information probably needs to be shared with your constituents to some degree. And that's where you need to make some decisions as a board of how much information will be disseminated to the general public. There's no steadfast federal rule or state rule that I'm aware of. Now, there might be some tribal issues there to be concerned with. They may require something or not, but if there isn't, you should put together something that's to deal with this situation. If someone wants information, what is it that you're going to allow to be released to the public? So you need to think that through and put that in place, perhaps put a policy together for that, incorporate that in your bylaws, and put together a process where requests have to be in writing, and they have to be submitted to the chairperson. The chairperson has to present that to, has to notify the executive director within 7 working days or something like that. And then certain information is available. Because remember, as recipients of federal funding, if that's one of your goals, we have to protect certain pieces of information. So we can always build into our policies and procedures for certain, limited access, limited viewing to certain documents that we deem to be confidential, or that the federal government considers to be confidential, which is, if you recall, PII, personally identifiable information. You need to identify what that is with your particular organization. For us at the Native Learning Center, it is mostly revolving around instructors, because we have a lot of them, subject matter experts, and it's their social security number, it's their marital status, it's their driver's license number, it's those kind of things. And for staff, it's those very same things, plus it's also biometric information, because we have a biometric system that we have to log into to report for work every day. So that records all kinds of personal information, and that's becoming more and more prevalent these days with all employers, biometrics, and also travel anywhere, go to any airport, and you're going to get into that as well. So anyway, those are things, some of the things, just a smattering of things that we need to protect. So policies and procedures need to be put in place when it comes to disseminating board information. You decide what is important to keep internally and what can be disseminated. Now, some of you I know put an annual report out. That's not a requirement, but that is also something where you're disseminating information, and you need to be aware of the extent of information that's contained in it. And hopefully you're not naming names or providing PII information in those annual reports that would identify a particular individual. We have to protect that information. But that an annual report is something you need to decide, because you're making information available to theoretically anyway, to the general public. And you always got to keep in mind what's best for your program and how you're going to protect your program and how you're going to explain that protection to potential funders who want to invest in your organization. And with that investment, whether it's grants or cash or planned giving, have expectations of you in what are you doing to use my investment, and how are you protecting my interest in your organization? We have to be able to answer that question. So this is whoever put that in there is opened upon a real area of concern, a personal concern for me, and that is protecting the organization at all times. That's my duty of care. Oh, I'm sorry. I was asking a question.
No, you're fine. I
Okay.
do bring some comments up from the chat because we did have some participation in the chat as well. Preston mentioned use points of order.
Mhm.
Darlene mentioned refer to policy when in doubt.
Mhm.
And then
Yes.
she also added tribes council protocol and reports.
Right, let me just comment real quickly on all three of those very, very quickly. Preston's comments, use point of order. If you're not familiar, point of order is a parliamentary procedure. It's included in the Roberts Rules of Order. It is a way to bring information to the group if they're, for example, moving in the wrong direction. Someone will say point of order, or if they're trying to do something out of sequence. That's where you bring point of order, which means, hold on for a minute, let me tell you how it's supposed to work based on parliamentary procedure. So yes, Preston, absolutely. That's a good idea. And Darlene, refer to policy when in doubt, always. And hopefully you have a policy to refer to. And let me give you a little heads up. If you've ever had a program review or an audit, the first thing the program reviewer or the auditor is going to ask for are your policies and procedures and your bylaws and the minutes from your meeting to make sure that you have policies in place and that you follow them. So absolutely refer to policy. Hopefully you have the policy. And also the last one there, tribes council protocol and reports. Yeah, there might be higher authorities that have policies and procedures in place that you're going to have to follow. That goes along with Darlene's comment. That's all.
Awesome. So let me pull up just some of the examples that you provided. Let me pull that back up here and maybe we can discuss those a little bit further. And then that's going to bring us kind of to wrap up this last exercise, which was kind of an easy one. Let's see. Resume. Here we go. Oh, here we go. Are you able to see the screen, Vince?
No, I see you.
You only see me?
I see it.
I see you and Robert. Hey, Robert.
Let me try that again then.
Hope you're enjoying training, Robert.
Got his headphones on.
I see the presentation, Cora. I don't know if Vince or
Okay.
anyone else does.
Okay,
See it now.
someone sees it.
Yeah, there it is.
So yeah, so you provided some of the possible answers here for this particular example. Now,
Way down at the end, probably.
yeah, I had to reload it because you weren't seeing it, so now I have to scroll back. 1 second, folks. We're almost there. We're almost there. Yeah. Maybe I can do this. Yep. So much easier. I can give it this one. 1 second. But basically, Vince, because you do have these answers on your end as well, I just wanted you to go over some of the possible answers that you mentioned for this particular exercise.
I can share my screen that has them.
No, I think it just popped up
Oh,
on
there you
mine.
go.
So as a BOD member, I would attempt to do the following, and you kind of gave us 4 different ways to avoid these dysfunctional meetings. So if you could speak a little bit more on those.
Yeah, those are just really what you should have had in front of you, or kind of the blank version of this where you kind of fill in. But these are my interpretations of, as a board member, I would attempt to do the following. 1, understand the operation, the finance. I was looking for words like operation, finances, compliance, functionality of the organization. Those kind of words and phrases was what I was looking for in that first none. The second one, I put the word understanding the position or positions of the organization on issues of concern. This is part of our duty of care as board members to understand the position, even if you might not agree with it as an individual board member. Maybe you voted against a particular issue or concern. Regardless of that, once the position is adopted or the, whatever is adopted by the board, as board members, we are in a capacity or should be in a capacity to support that decision. And so I'm looking for those kind of words or phrases there to understand, agree to, and promote the position of the organization on any particular issue of concern. Always, you're always there for the good of the organization, even if you don't necessarily agree wholeheartedly with the voting process and the decision from that vote. Our role is to support that. Once decisions are made, we are there to support it. If you don't want to support it, then maybe it's time to roll off that board and move into something else that you have an interest in. That's what I was looking for, number 2. And number 3 is that dysfunctional concern that I have, the micromanaging of board members, of staff, especially when they're at that point of maturity, when the board really does not need to be involved with the minutia of day-to-day activities because you have staff. You have a staff person or a series of staff person. And the other dysfunctional thing that came up as a question yesterday, when staff members or board members are circumventing the chain of command, the communication chain of command, they're circumventing that and they're having discussions or, moving around that, and, got staff members that are skipping over the executive director to talk to board members or vice versa. We want to avoid those kind of situations. There should be a protocol in place where communication flows from the board to the organization, to the staff, and vice versa, following a chain of command. And usually that chain of command is hosted by the chairperson at the board level to the chief staff person, executive director, whatever. That is the communication system. And then from there, they go respectively either to other board members or to staff subordinates from those 2 contact people. That's how things are supposed to work for boards. So we want to avoid the dysfunction of micromanagement by understanding where dysfunction comes when it comes to communication. And then the last one, the catch-all, follow the mission or rules and the bylaws and regulations of the organization at all time. Hopefully, as it was pointed out here, you have policies in place and you should have bylaws in place that cover all the operation. So these were the kind of phrases or words I was looking for the organization. Follow the rules to the best of your ability and follow the protocols of the organization. It's pretty clear, that as board members, that's part of our duty of care. And our duty of obedience is to do just that and to convey that message to other board members, whether they're potential new members or just the community at large, that we are ambassadors. That's the word I'm looking for. We as board members are ambassadors of the organization 24/7. And if we have the delegated authority to speak on behalf of the organization, we want to consider that a privilege, and because it could be taken away, and speak on behalf of the organization to our membership, to our constituents, to our potential grant funders or donors, to legislators, to tribal leaders on behalf of the organization. And we want to make sure that the message is clear and that we're all in sync and we all are playing from the same playbook. And everyone basically knows what the other is doing. That is the expectation I have to board members as a whole, and that's what I, bring to the table when we do these kind of training programs. So that's all I have on this subject, Cora.
Awesome. So I want to thank you guys for sharing your answers, and thank you, Vince, again for another thorough response. So that puts us quite ahead of schedule. So I want to open up this time. So if you have any burning questions that you want to ask Vince, any doubts, concerns, commentary, please plug those away into the chat as we get ready to kind of wrap up this session on Board of Directors. So I'll give you guys a couple of minutes to type away if you have any questions, any concerns, comments, or doubts. Crystal, are you going to say something?
Yes, I was just gonna say that,
American. I love everything that this country has done for myself and my family.
so for, so I'm gonna go ahead and mute. Yeah. That happens. It's okay. No, I was just gonna, make note again, and don't worry, Vince and I will get back to you after the session for what it is that you're looking for. And surely we will also, if you're still in the room, I'm not sure if you're still in the room, but if you are, we will get the item that you were looking for as well. So fear not. And I don't think there was anything else from anyone else that needed like follow up after, but if there is, by all means, go ahead and throw that into the chat, and we are very good here about getting back to y'all. So at least try our best to. So definitely throw any requests or anything like that into the chat, and we'll do that. But as Cora said, questions, feel free to throw them out now.
Well, I know one of the things they were looking for was a example of a code of conduct. I think we've identified that, and we can send that out to the group if that's still of interest. And another one was, I made a note on it, financial statements, a monthly financial statement, and I think asked this if Ann is still in the room here. A monthly financial statement, yeah, pass through with information, if possible, on pass through for grants, expenses carrying over from a current year into the next year. I don't have that readily available, but I'm going to reach out to another subject matter expert that the Native Learning Center works with on a regular basis, who is a CPA. And I'm hoping that she would be able to provide in her portfolio of information that very thing. And if we're successful in getting it, then we'll send it to the group as well. So I have two things on my checklist. And I think I followed through on the code of conduct. I found that, but the accounting one, I'll have to do a little research on. So if there's anything else, do you provide this type of training for specific boards if a request is made? Oh, yes, of course. Yeah, we do that. That is a very good question. That is part, we can do it. I guess, Cora, that would be more of a virtual training.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that would be, so yes, you'd want to connect with either Crystal or Cora on that, and then we can set that up. Done that many times over the years, these days we're doing a lot of this virtually, but in the past, and if things open up in the near future by our tribe, that allows travel, we would actually physically go out to the tribal entity face to face and do the training. At no cost, either way, virtually or on site. But I think in the near future, at least in the remainder of this fiscal year and moving into the next fiscal year, it's going to be a virtual training. But yeah, we could dedicate it to a specific board, which is really good because we can drill down in advance of that and get some of the issues that are of concern for that particular board. And that goes for anyone in the chat room, by the way.
Yes, and
Yeah,
keep in mind, after this session is over, I will be sending out again the presentation slides, like I sent them this morning to everybody that's here, the worksheets, and then if Vince, you can forward me that code of conduct, and I'll attach that as well. So you'll get all of those resources again in a very nice email. Okay.
Cora, you should have it. I sent that to you earlier today. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I sent it to Crystal. My bad. I'll send it to you too.
Okay. No worries. Okay, so that's going to we're really kind of wrapping up today's training. So we would like to see what you think of today's training in just one word. So I'm going to plug another, it creates a very beautiful word cloud to see what is kind of like the sentiment overall for how we did today and then how you feel about today's training. So if you can go ahead and just let us know and we will be able to see that. So if you click on that link, tell us how would you summarize or describe today's training in one word? And if you are not able to use Menti for whatever reason, it's not loading or whatnot, please feel free to drop those into the chat as well. Nice. Our first word is up. Informative. Can you see them, Vince?
Yeah, I can see them populating now. I can see it. And I also want to make a comment to Shauna, who just sent a really nice comment. You're welcome. I hope this training is productive. And as Cora mentioned, this is all being recorded.
Yes.
Too. The webinars were recorded and this session is recorded, and you can download those and share if you wish. You could share that information, including the PowerPoints, including the visual part of it as well with anyone, that you can do that. So hopefully that's of help to you. Plus the advantage, as we just talked moments ago, about doing training in the future, one-on-one training if need be. So I'm liking the words that are coming up, being populated here.
Yes.
Fulfilled, informative, interactive, enlightening, needed, descriptive. Those are all words I'm thinking too, because I know personally from being on boards, this kind of training is invaluable. We need it, and we need it on a regular basis. That's why I'm just stressing that orientation process and continuing education for board members, new and experienced, especially the continuing education. We cannot have board members on our boards that are not interested in bettering themselves and, increasing their knowledge, if anything, on, just the fundamentals of being involved in it. And we know also from experience that if you're receiving any kind of investments or any kind of federal funding, that you're going to have to prove that you do continuing education of your decision makers, and anyone, and anyone would have to do that. Shauna was with the Housing Authority. She just sent that wonderful message. If you're receiving Indian Housing Block Grant funds, one of the requirements is that you've got to have continuing education. It is. You got to do that in your self-monitoring report that you submit with your APR at the end of the year. So you have to verify that you do continuing education training on a regular basis. You don't have to name names, but you have to show that you have it. So you better document the fact that you've got training going. That's what we do at the Native Learning Center. We try to provide, right, Cora? We're always talking about continuing education and documenting the fact that we're doing it.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Go right ahead.
I don't know if you've covered this already, but how do you feel about tribal leaders being a part of the boards?
It happens. I've seen it on many. Boards, housing boards and other type boards. It happens. And I think that's one of the questions that just came up from somebody else, but it happens, and it happens more frequently than you think. And I think what happens sometimes is just because they're affiliated with the tribal council or tribal board doesn't necessarily that they mean that they have an understanding or they're comfortable with the new board situation. So again, that's where the orientation comes into place. That's where your bylaws come into place and your policies and procedures to make sure if that's the scenario, if they're being appointed, and you have no control over it, they're appointed. And this happens too, by the way. We want to take steps on our end as the board to make sure that they're oriented as they come on board and that we have reasonable assurance that they are being educated in the process that we're doing as a board. So it happens. Board members come from different sources, but the way you got to treat everyone the same way. If you're going to do orientation for new board members, regardless of their background, then you've got to do it. Even if they've got PhDs and they're attorneys and an attorney that holds a CPA degree and, et cetera, et cetera. Everyone needs to be oriented, and it needs to be an ongoing process and be done as methodically as you can do it. So if you're in a situation where you've got tribal members or anyone that's appointed to your board, so be it. Then you're just going to have to deal with that, to be frank. But you want to build in mechanisms that give you some reasonable assurance that these people are going to be trained, or at least you're bringing knowledge to the table, you're bringing information to the table, so that you're doing the best that you can do. That's my take on that. Yeah. Council members assigned as a non-voting member. Okay. And sometimes they're assigned as voting members. So even more important that we have an orientation process and continuing education. But here it sounds like you've got tribal members, so you want to make sure that everything's running properly, that you've got policies and procedures in place, that your bylaws are in place, and that you're running parliamentary procedure processes to make sure decisions are done, because I guarantee that non-voting member or voting member is going back to tribal council and sharing that information, most likely. They may require them to be ex officio, okay, right, empowering, thank you. Council members assigned as a non-voting member, just talked about that. If they are a voting member, they may have conflict of interest. Yeah, they might. So this is where we need to have some protocol. This is where we need to identify the potential for, and they should be signing a conflict of interest that is designed for your board with your issues, so you can identify those issues and confront them. Because there might be a conflict of interest, but it may be located or identified in a specific area that could be dealt with that individual abstaining from voting on a particular topic or issue. And maybe that's how you deal with it. So code of conduct, conflict of interest, orientation done first, even with appointed people from council to board. You need those mechanisms in place to protect the program. Another comment, sometimes tribal officials get involved in our housing issues. Oh, really? If a tribal member doesn't agree with an answer from our housing staff, oh, I've heard that, my gosh. This breaks the chain of command. It sure does. Might be a good thing to have tribal officials attend this type of training too. Couldn't agree with you more, Shauna. Absolutely. Everyone and anyone should be involved in that, so they understand the protocol and they understand the possibility of dysfunction and issues that are problems that are unique to the board, but not necessarily unique to the tribal council. And that's exactly what Shauna is describing here. So yeah, everyone gets involved in it if possible to attend. I know you can't force people to attend, but you want to try to get as many people in there exposed, especially our leadership. And you're absolutely right. You're going to try to mitigate that to the best of you. You have no control over it. I've seen this so many times. And it comes up just as Shauna has described it there. This happens. It happens. So you need the protocols in place and the processes, and you need to follow them, and you need to educate board members that this is the process that we use, and we need to mitigate these situations as much as possible. And if you need me to do it, I'll be glad to do that for you. If you want me virtually to come out there and say these things, because it's easy for me as a subject matter expert and a past board member and working 11 years with the Seminole Tribe of Florida, and being exposed to tribal council and being both sides of the equation, board member and staff, key staff member, to say these things to board members and potential board members, and to paint the right picture and help you be successful. So that's what I'm here for. That's what Cora is here for. That's what Crystal's here for. That's what the Native Learning Center is here for.
Yes, please feel free to reach out to us. We do TA requests, and I know Crystal and I were very diligent in getting back to you as soon as possible. So save those emails. I know I saw in the chat, Crystal put her email in the chat for you guys, and then you've been receiving all the materials from my email as well. So please feel free to reach out. And also on our website, www.nativelearningcenter.com, you can always submit a request on there as well. So as we get ready to start wrapping things up, I'm going to pass it off back to Crystal for our closeout.
Thank you, Cora. Thank you, Vince. Thank you, everyone. Okay, so a few things. I went ahead. I don't know if it's going to pop in there. Okay, yeah, sorry. I've got major lag going on, but I went ahead and put my email address again. I put Cora's email address, and then I put the Native Learning Center's website where you can go ahead and submit any request. I will say this, and I want to preface it because I don't think a lot of the time we think, oh, I can get you to come out here tomorrow. No, that's not really how it works. These TA requests can take anywhere between 60 to 90 days, and it's more along the 90-day mark. So the earlier you submit it, the better, because then we can get, planning to get an instructor out there to y'all ASAP. So just keep that in mind. We are friendly, like Cora says. We try and get these technical assistance requests processed as quickly as possible, just because we know how important a lot of the trainings that we do are to, whether it's your grant, your board, your anything, your housing authority, your tribally designated housing entity, whatever it may be. So with that being said, feel free to email us. We'll get the process rolling. Just be mindful that it can take up to 3 months. So, and I don't want that to deter you, but I just want to be realistic and transparent with you. So with that, Cora plugged today's survey into the chat box, and you can see it on the screen. Please just take a second to fill it out. It's the same survey that we do in our webinars, but this was a workshop. So we need to know how we can make this better for y'all. So if you can just take a second to go ahead and fill that out. It's 5 questions, really easy peasy. Let us know if you love us. Let us know if you hate us. Let us know if we can improve, whatever it may be. Hopefully yeah, or somewhere in the middle. Hopefully it's more on the love side of the spectrum. But if not, that's okay. We can take constructive criticism. So with that, let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. If there's any other slides, I don't know if there are. Yes. Okay, so yeah, join us for our next training. Build your own strategic plan. Woo! I know that a lot of this stuff can be like overwhelming with all the information that we have and that we provide for all of y'all. But that's what these workshops are there for. They're intended to kind of break things down on a very fundamental level. It allows you to ask questions and any other curiosities that you might have about the process of building your own strategic plan. Vince will be heading up this workshop, but so will Cora. So I'm very excited to see how that's gonna go. But yeah, attend, join, register, and that's gonna be at 1 p.m. Eastern again, just as today, 12 p.m. Central, 11 a.m. Mountain, and 10 a.m. Pacific. So yeah, and registration is always free. So that's the one beautiful thing about our program and what our funding provides. It provides these trainings for y'all in Indian country for free. So, and the same thing goes with those TA requests. You don't come out of pocket for any of that. We do. So with that, join us on that. That'll be March 10th. And then don't forget to access our recorded webinars. That's another incredibly valuable resource that we have. You can find those on www.nativelearningcenter.com under the Cathedral Webinars tab. We keep them up for about 18 months. So feel free to view them and share them with your friends and colleagues, as Vince mentioned earlier. We really do encourage that. It has the material in there. It has a live session of Vince or whoever the subject matter expert is for that webinar going through the material. So it's not just, you see slides moving. No, you actually hear the instructor speaking. So it's definitely beneficial to sit through that. And then I know we also have our YouTube channel. I don't know if that comes after this, Cora, but we also have the YouTube channel that houses all of these workshops so that you can also reference that at a later date and time. But don't forget to also check out our upcoming events as well on our social media sites such as Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Snapchat. And don't forget that we have a podcast where Cora and I are the hosts. It's called the Hobothanga Podcast, and you can find that on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, and Simplecast. All right. Well, that concludes the end of today's session. I really do appreciate all of you taking the time out of your days for being here. I know Cora and Vince does as well. We're just so grateful and honored that y'all chose us to be part of your training and learning experience. So thank you, everyone. And I hope you all have a wonderful day. And we definitely hope to connect with all of you really, really, really soon. So until next time, which will be next Thursday, hopefully, we'll see you then. Until then, have a good day, good weekend, enjoy yourselves, and goodbye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Thanks.
I see we have a hand raised. Oh, no, never mind.